Okay, and our recording has started. So all the expletives against goblins that you've just made, you gotta cool those down. Because hello there. Welcome to Ramble number 2. We are actually 2 days off the anniversary of Ramble number 1.
Is that really? Wow.
That's actually the case. Well, this is my guest, GentleTractor. GentleTractor, you want to say hi?
Hello, I am GentleTractor. Thank you for having me as a guest again on this episode 2 / the annual return, I guess, or whatever it is.
we tried to do one like 6 months ago, but I think I just woke up that day in like the worst mood possible, so we just chatted instead.
Yeah.
So this would have been a possibly biannual ramble, but now it's set in stone as an annual one.
Once a year, just to look forward to, like Christmas, you know.
There you go. You're like end of April, start of May.
There's nothing else going on this time of year, so why not?
Yeah, get your family all around the TV, just watch your little Discord icons light up. Oh man, lucky you guys.
That's magical.
Okay, so what I wanted to do today is I want to just walk through the last year. I think, especially in this game, we probably look back too much. So we're just going to do it again. We're just going to review the past year and all the crazy things that have happened and all the involvement, not all the involvement, a small part of the involvement that we've had in some of the going-ons. So I'd like to start off by, if you remember around this time last year, there was 3 skills which had been fairly recently pitched, and I think they were being polled around this time. So let's kind of walk back to then and talk about that. We were involved in some of the pretty early discussions where we initially pitched some of these ideas.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, do you recall kind of your initial reaction to hearing about these and what you thought of all that?
Yeah, that was, I guess, quite an exciting one. I guess leading up to that point where it had been finally confirmed, I guess at some point the year prior, I think, like talking about, okay, we're gonna attempt the new skill again, right after warding some years earlier. I think quite a few years earlier now, hadn't it been?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think obviously there's, based on all their conversations and their surveying and everything, in some ways there was a lot of scope and potential, but at the same time I think there was quite clearly a few front runners and favorites, and you could sort of see some pigeonholes appearing, I think, before they'd even revealed what the 3 of them were going into it. So you kind of tell that, some sort of big open-ended exploration-y, adventure-y, sailing-y focused thing was probably going to turn up. And something to do with creatures, whether it was looking at summoning again or a different take on players' versions of ranching or what ended up being taming, obviously, that we got. I think that kind of felt logical. So I remember that initial reveal of those 3 again being involved somewhat early on with it. They weren't wildly shocking or anything, which is probably a good sign, I think. The one that maybe stood out a bit more, I think they even shared it as their wild card, was Shamanism, which you can maybe touch on quite a bit more in just a bit. But yeah, I remember being quite, I think overall reasonably pleasantly surprised or happy with the choices overall. I think they covered a good spread of themes and topics, and covered a lot of different player points of view and opinions I'd seen shared as to what people wanted to see from a new skill. So as far as the 3 choices went, yeah, I think they did a pretty good job with revealing that. I don't know what your kind of initial first impressions of the 3 of them were.
Yeah, I think we initially had a little guessing game. What do you think the 3 skills are going to be? And I kind of copped out and said, what if I give 3 categories, 3 general ideas? And I think, if I recall correctly, my ideas were an exploration-y, sail-y kind of skill, something that's something more adventurous, I suppose. The second thought I had was something that reminds me of summoning. And then the third, I think I might have said either a gathering or production. I can't remember exactly what I said. But it was a bit off from what shamanism ended up being. So it very much ended up landing within what I kind of expected this to be. In fact, I really did quite expect either sailing or some form of exploration. But I thought sailing seemed more likely, just because it it's been the most talked about idea besides ideas that have been rehashed from RuneScape 3. It's like if you want to have a new skill, that's almost the one that's going to have the most likely chance of success.
Yeah, I
And so,
think. Oh, sorry.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think if they had tried to bring back the conversation without including something akin to sailing, I think that probably would have just dominated the conversation. It's like, where's sailing? Like, why is this not here? So I think including it was, well, clearly in the long run, it's been the right thing, as it just about creeped its way to the top of the three. So yeah, I think that made sense.
Yeah. And the ones I quite obviously I liked sailing because by that point I'd pitched a sailing idea and a little plugin that I'd cobbled together, and I wanted to run further with that idea. Taming, I was like, I thought I liked Taming more than Shamanism actually, and I kind of flipped between the two here and there, but I ended up wanting that one more just because Shamanism was one that I felt a little struggled a bit with identity. It kind of tried to mix a gathering and production skill together into one. And then there's the whole thing about like its gathering components just kind of being components from farming and hunter. And then just the complications of trying to introduce a skill that like improves all of the items, like everything. Like that's so broad, so sweeping. It'd be hard to make it come into the game in a natural and balanced way while still feeling exciting.
Yeah, no,
So that was my battle.
I think I had pretty much identical thoughts to you. Like, Taming was definitely my second favorite, pretty close. Honestly, I would have been quite content with either sailing or Taming if either one had to come out. Because I've always quite liked that idea of the creature companion is just such a typical kind of thing in so many games, MMOs, whatever. And for me, it's like I would definitely say I've got issues with summoning, but all of those issues I have are kind of how it was implemented and its mechanics and balancing and some of the thematics adjacent to those things, right? And that was kind of the point of Taming. It's like, right, okay, what if you had like the core element of what summoning was, which is creatures that are your companions that do a thing, but you kind of fixed all these problems. Like summoning, it wasn't really a true summoning skill from a training perspective. It was a charm gathering and pouch crafting skill, which was a very strange hybrid of like non-tradable gathering plus rune crafting-esque bank lapping skills. And then you didn't really gain any summoning XP from a summoned creature, like not in any meaningful capacity anyway.
From the exciting part of the skill, the fun part.
Yeah, exactly. and they were also very just like disposable, right? Like a summoning familiar was there, timed, and then just went away and it was gone. It was like, doesn't really feel like your creature at any point in time. Whereas Taming just went like, boom, 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 boom. Yeah, let's fix all of those. Let's not do that. Let's have like tameable creatures you go out in the world and get, and then the act of taming them gives taming XP. The act of using them in whatever way they might have been used would give taming XP. And yeah, the creatures feel more kind of attached to your character and your character's progression. And I think there's a lot of fun things you could have done with that. Maybe it would all verge a bit like, I don't know, Petscapey and Pokemon-y, but honestly, like I don't even see that as a bad thing. But I get why people do. I do understand that, but I think the only thing I would maybe push back on a little bit, and even admittedly, I maybe was hesitant at first on this topic as well, because I know some people were like, this is just a hunter expansion, right? Like, this is like creatures. And it's like, on a surface level, maybe it is. Like, maybe there was a version of Taming that would have made sense where you like hunt a creature first and then tame it as like a companion skill. But I think what kind of contextualized it for me was just taking a step back and thinking like, well, hang on a minute. What are other skills doing? And what are like the themes of them? Because when you break down a skill like woodcutting, it's about chopping a tree and it's about wood. It's like, well, how many other skills have we got in game that are about wood? So you got fletching, like the processing of wood into bows. You got construction, making furniture out of it. You got fire making, just straight up burning wood. It's like those are all quite different uses of the same like core theme of like these skills are about wood and how you process it or how you use it or how you gather it. And that to me was like, oh, actually, that's the relationship between hunter and taming. It's like they're both creature themed skills, which is fine, as we just established. You can have a theme across multiple skills, but hunter is about catching and killing them, whereas taming is about befriending and, gaining a little crew of your own critters, right? It's like it's being nice to them. It's the polar opposite, whereas hunter goes off in one direction, taming takes a sharp right-hand turn. much like you can't really say, artisanal crafter making something out of wood requires the same skill set as someone who's just taken a tinderbox and setting something ablaze, right? There are two very different skill sets, even though they share a common theme. So I do think Taming got a bit of a short end of the stick on that one.
And I definitely think if when trying to decide whether something kind of constitutes a skill, I think you have to have several different components. First, you have to have a unique theme. The second thing you need is enough design space. You don't want to. I think you could make a jewelry skill, but because it's already covered by crafting, like I think you'd have to make it like really expansive for it to actually feel like it fits in the game, and then it's just not that an exciting idea. So probably wouldn't go that direction.
Yeah.
And the last thing I think you need is 1 second, I mentioned strong theme, design space, and I was going to say something else is very important, but I guess it wasn't that important at all.
Might come back to it.
Yeah, but I think when you look at the design space that Summoning covered, it was a lot. And I think most people can agree that some of it was kind of broken and would have to be adapted to work with old school and mechanics we've worked with for the past dozen or so years. But I definitely think there was enough design space to flesh out something that was quite rewarding. Although that was also one of the problems, is that they didn't really come up with a very strong set of ideas for what you would do with these creatures.
No.
Like kind of what you were getting out of it. And that kind of hindered a lot of the perceptions around the skill as well. And to be fair, with sailing included, when you look at the reward space, it is there. There are new things that are being offered, but it's stuff that you kind of have to carve out from an already jam-packed game with all these different reward spaces already covered by so many other skills that we've built up over the past 10 years. You really have to work to carve out something that doesn't cross, like that feels like it has its own theme for its rewards and doesn't cross over into the space of other reward systems.
Yeah, that was one of the big things, just to start touching more on shamanism again, that struck me as, I'll say a little bit odd, but I kind of get why they did it with the 3 skills that were presented. Because much like exactly what you said, I think you were right. Like Taming was very light on the reward details, as was Sailing. It was more just the abstract notion of you will use your tamed creatures for stuff, and you will use your boats on the ocean for things, and you were like filling in the blanks. Whereas Shamanism came along, and I mean I may well just go headfirst into this now and talk about Shamanism a bit more on my perspective anyway. Where it's like, Shamanism will let you augment your items. It will change the stats of your weapons, improve your tools, and add extra things to your armor sets. And it was like, boom, here's the reward space, just like laid down flat out in front of you. And it was like, whoa, that's like a strong position to come into on a skill, but also quite a weird way of doing it in a sense, because I mean, it's, to me, that did feel a little bit odd to go so strongly on the reward space of one of the 3 skills and not the other 2, because in theory, playing like devil's advocate, the idea of gaining an improved piece of gear is not intimately intertwined with shamanism or being a shaman, and it could be applicable to any of those 3 skills or quite a lot of our existing skills, right? Like if you wanted to say, oh, the taming skill is actually about using your creatures to go and find ancient treasures that they can sniff out and fly up to and dig and scurry and find ancient things that you can attach to your items, and then that's how you augment things. It's like, oh, you could have had like an item augmentation system through Taming. Or maybe Sailing, you would find ancient treasures lurking at the bottom of the ocean, and that would be how you improve your gear. Like you could have done an augmentation system through Sailing as well. So it's like the reward system is pretty universal, that it could be applied to anything. And so that's why it struck me as surprising to like really double down on that being like shamanism's one of the quite the big points of it, leading with the rewards rather than the rest of it. And then again, just to like backtrack on that a bit, much like you said about shamanism, it felt for me like shamanism was my least favorite of the 3, and that was partially because of I'm not a super big fan of leading with that kind of reward and what that would potentially do. Like the idea of augmentation in general is still a little bit sketchy in my mind, of like drastically altering like iconic or nostalgic items, and I don't think the game should go down a path where things start getting quite complicated. I think like a Bandos chest plate or an abyssal whip, they should be like a Bandos chest plate or an abyssal whip. It should be quite clear what they are, and if you can start changing a lot of them depending on how many different ways you could change them, it gets a bit dicey for me in terms of how far you're drifting from old school's very simplistic roots. But obviously there are ways of doing like simplistic upgrade systems, and we've already got a plethora of that in game, where you just turn things into other things, right? Like the two I just mentioned. You turn a Bandos into a Torva piece, you turn a Abyssal Whip into a Abyssal Tentacle. So it's like, it can be done without even needing new skills technically. So if it had a lead in that direction, I'd be okay. But yeah, it's the gameplay side of it as well, feeling a bit... It was so all-encompassing, and Shamanism touching so many areas where it wanted to be it kind of pitched like a mini foraging skill within the Shamanism skill as a part of it. Well, I've seen some cool player suggestions over the year for just like a standalone foraging skill, which I do actually think has merit and makes sense when you look at our other simplistic gathering skills in game. But having that as like a part of a bigger skill, and then also turning bits of what could be Slayer or Hunter of, I think their examples were like killing Hellhounds for Hellhound blood and Giants for their bone marrow, and using that as components in shamanistic ritual creation something, and then also making things as a shaman. It was like it was sounding like it was really going into territories of a lot of our existing skills in a way that I couldn't easily discern or decipher why something was a shamanism act versus not a hunter or a slayer or a herblore or a crafting act. And that's where it got... There's so many layers of it that didn't sound like they were the identity of a shaman, other than one. The one that really stuck out to me, where I was like, that has potential, there's lots of cool stuff there, was the actual spirit realm itself. Because it's like, okay, if a shaman is someone in touch with the spirit realm, and that means whatever it means, I don't know, going into it, finding unique things, doing unique things, performing strange shamanistic spirit realm rituals, whatever, that's quite unique. That doesn't really fit into any of our existing skills, not super neatly anyway. I think you could justify that being the identity of a shaman, and then what they find in the spirit realm or whatever is like your shamanistic reward output. And that's like a direction that I'd be pretty happy with seeing. But again, the way it was presented initially was just lots of layers, lots of existing skills. It was getting dangerously close to sort of sitting on top of, and I just couldn't quite see that nice, clean, clear distinction, which I could see with the other two. It's like with a sailing skill, like you are a sailor, and you sail boats. As a taming skill, you're a tamer, and you tame creatures. But with a shamanism skill, I couldn't quite see what they wanted it to be in terms of you are a shaman and you are shamaning in ways that involves lots of stuff, gathering spirit components, foraging for berries, killing hellhounds for blood, making ritual circles, making totems, augmenting your gear. It was like, whoa. Like, I think it needed to pick its lane. I think that's what I think it needs to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think when I look back and I look at all the reasoning behind why shamanism ended up being the way it was, it made a lot of sense to me from the very premise of like, hey, we would like to have 3 different skills to present to the community. We have one that's more adventure explory support skill. We have one that's a different kind of support skill with animals. Can we try, like, we're not going to be able to touch combat skills, not by a mile. So how about we try like the production gathering aspect? But the problem I think they faced right away was that how are you supposed to introduce a new gathering skill alone? Okay, what's it going to feed into? You kind of need to have something there. You're not just creating a gathering skill. You are feeding into a lot of other skills that currently exist. Or you need to create a production skill. So what gathering skills are going to go into that production skill? And so when you try and find a theme of a production skill or a gathering skill that can just kind of stand alone without a partner, that's really hard. I mean, I think you could make an argument for foraging, but at the same time, I didn't ever see like a ton of demand for a foraging skill. I just don't think people saw it as all that exciting. And I think that was kind of where they ended up going with combining a gathering and a production skill together, was just, hey, we can create this like single little ecosystem that runs all by its own and produces something exciting.
Yeah.
But that also stuck with me. The exciting part was, essentially the invention part. I think it took some inspiration from RuneScape 3's invention skill.
Oh,
I don't think they ever wanted to go as deep into the crazy mechanics that are involved there. Something definitely more suitable to old school RuneScape. But I think that's trying to attach the theme of shamanism with the idea of improving your gear. That is just such a weird thematic combination to try and mix together, versus what RuneScape 3 did. It's an invention skill. You invent new things. You don't shaman your gear better. And that was always just, just the theming of that really didn't gel well with me.
Yeah, I do think it could have been a lot of nasty potential for, as I say, like negatively impacting existing skills, which I think a new skill should absolutely not be doing, right? It needs to be positively impacting existing skills. And it just feels to me like a shame. Like if we're doing some sort of upgrade system where, hey, can I augment my Torva plate body now? It's like I kind of would want to do that with smithing, right? Like I'd like to have that be involved, because we have such useless production skills which could do a lot more. Like crafting could improve some of our ranged gear and some of our magic gear with assistance of rune crafting, as well as fletching for certain bows and things. And there's a lot of just scope that's kind of been left on the table and not really been touched for the past decade of old school's life. So yeah, there's just like a lot of things there that I'd be worried if shamanism did go in that direction, it would just be taken away from potential areas of the existing game that should be doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's as I said before, the design space is already covered by other skills, or should be covered by other skills. Whereas when you take something like taming, having a pet or having an animal, this is something that's been done through human history and is done throughout all of fantasy. Having these helpers that are non-human, or like non-humanoid, I suppose, helping you do various tasks. That's an entirely different design space to work with. Same thing with sailing, opening up the entire rest of the oceanic world to be able to exploit all them resources. That's a completely different design space that can feed back into a lot of other skills. So yeah, shamanism really just didn't feel like a natural fit that way. And the other thing that someone said to me after probably some time, I don't know, when was it? Maybe some months ago. Someone said to me that if shamanism passed, they were really worried that it would end up being like Ruinous Powers, where we have this really great idea of like this powerful new expansion, all these different things that we can add to the game, but it would probably most likely get caught in this design hell where we have to be so finicky with balancing to try and make it fit within the current game, but we also want to make it strong so that it's something to chase, something that's exciting, something that when you log in that first day the skills release, you immediately have something that you really want to go for. It would probably more likely end up like Ruinous Powers, where you just get stuck in this decision-making process where we can't make anything fun, because if we do so, we can't make it balanced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think that part of that came from that problem of leading so quickly with that, as I say, that reward output of just putting item augmentation down and just dropping that as like a big thing for it. And I think, yeah, all those problems that you listed there, I think would be run into, unfortunately. But I mean, it's, try and spin things, I guess, more positively as well, because I guess it's worth acknowledging, maybe before we talk a bit more about sailing, it's like shamanism did come very close to sailing, and it was still very popular, and to the point where Jagex have outright essentially like promised, I think they even used that word, where it's like, yeah, we will come back to shamanism. We will, like, it will come back to the player's eyes in some way, shape or form through another devlog, future, whatever. Multiple skills might reemerge, and that might be one of them again. But it's coming back at some point. So that's worth, I think, bearing in mind. And if I'd again, to try and like be more positive about it, I'd say, like, so what, for me personally, how I would kind of love to see that reimagine or reappear again in a slightly different format would be definitely trying to like hone in on its like singular identity a bit more. Maybe not leaning so heavily immediately on that style of reward output. If you can figure out again a different one that makes sense for it, then cool. But I definitely wanted to see more of a focus on what a shaman can be that really is unique to being a shaman and shamanism. So like spirit realm stuff was quite cool to me. I'd also love to see it just more heavily embrace itself as a kind of pseudo production skill, as it were. Then if that's what they sort of wanted to do, shamans to make stuff in some shamanistic ritualistic way, then it's like, cool, okay, do that, but let's see what we can use for existing gathering systems to feed into it. I think the big two for me would just be like, okay, why not take like Hunter to begin with, which is like the traditional skill that doesn't have its proper like consistent companion skill to go along with it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like Hunter projects, and hey, we just had a bunch more added to the game with Varlamore, a bunch more furs and meats and all sorts of things, different parts of creatures. that would make perfect sense. I could see a shaman, like, yeah, making weird little fur things or whatever. Like the idea of making a little totem in some way through a shaman ritual, I can kind of buy that, and using like natural parts and stuff. And then maybe even tying in, broader than just hunter. I mean, this is I'll keep it short, but it could go into a much broader topic about like wider game balance and drop tables and stuff. But I could see Slayer being involved in that as well, where it's like, and just combat in general, where the constant conversation is always around like, oh man, what do you put on drop tables to not devalue existing skills, resources, alchables, GP, power creep? It's like, well, I mean, if you had a skill where you needed to gather some new unique items, like, different parts of Slayer creatures that now dropped, like they mentioned briefly in their, dev blogs and stuff, like Hellhound blood or bone marrow or frog guts, whatever it was, right? Like different parts of monsters just started dropping. Then yeah, that would give them a new like design space and reward area to tap into. That was essentially like, I mean, you could essentially turn Slayer into its own gathering skill at that point, and it has its own unique gathered resources that then feed into Shamanism. Then you've got like that combat portion of Slayer or the non-combat option of Hunter that either could feed into it. And then the big elephant in the room would obviously be players clearly don't like the idea of buyable skills, which is what production skills are usually synonymous with. And that's a tough one to like crack, because a lot of the value of those items come from the nature of how they translate to XP and things like that, and it gets messy. I do think it's genuinely possible to do a production skill that isn't inherently buyable while still having the tradable area. Sorry, what's that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple in that you just make the resources that feed into the production skill lean more towards the reward side and not the experience side.
Yeah, that's the big one. So that's something I would love to see. Again, like if Shamanism did that, let's say shamans can go into the spirit realm like they pitched as well. Maybe there's some unique gameplay that's more proactive, that, is kind of time consuming, but also just the best XP per hour. Whatever you're doing in the spirit realm as a shaman is like, that's your bread and butter of training shamanism. Then once you get some levels and whatnot, you've got some XP under your belt, you can use some of these items, and they still generate a bit of shamanism XP for processing some Slayer or Hunter resources, but it's not optimal XP per hour to like process the items into the reward outputs. So if you want to train it optimally, you're not having to worry about splashing out GP on anything. You can just do it through this spirit realm thing. But then that also, in theory, should have a much better economic effect on the output that you're making of items, right? Because all production skills we have at the minute are just, you're never going to have like a plate body from smithing or a bow from fletching ever be worth anything, because the player has to just mass produce them. So you don't really want to encourage people to mass produce those end products. So if the XP emphasis was slightly reduced on that for a new skill, a new production skill, and it was more focused on, no, players are going to make these end products because of the utility of the end product, then maybe there'd be more scope for production loops to be more profitable and players only making what is demanded from the wider economy. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of potential there, though. I don't think a production skill has to inherently be a viable skill, and I think Shamanism could be really, really interesting if it explored some of those different areas and tied in and integrated better with existing skills, and also made sure it emphasized its own unique identity as like a shaman.
Yeah. And then I think to kind of top it off, you have to find a reward space that I think suits the idea of shamanism better. The part of the problem is that, as you said, the idea was packaged with a specific reward space in mind. And it's hard to say whether people are more attached to the idea, the theming of shamanism, or the rewards that were promised, which I think the rewards were the more problematic part, but that's probably not the more common belief. I think you'd have to carve out some sort of reward system that really works well with the theme of the skill and doesn't cross over design space. I mean, if you were to be crazy enough and said, okay, we have our gathering skills for this shamanism skill. We have them as hunter. Maybe we can throw in a bit of slayer in there, something like that. Maybe even some farming, or then our shamanism is our production skill. Okay, what's our output? What are we using it for? And that's kind of where you had to. Yeah, that's kind of where the battle's going to be. If you want to be really crazy, you say, okay, our output, our third skill in this partnership is going to be a new support skill called Taming. You shamanism spirit realm these different animals, and then you can tame them and send them into battle, whatever you do with them. No, I don't hate that idea, but that would need a lot of cooking, I think.
I mean, I know it would almost certainly never fly with the players, but like, I'm not even against the idea to a multi-skill release. That's actually quite exciting to me. Like, if they ever want to do like a gathering production skill combo or a production support skill, like, hey, these two feed into each other and they both overlap. That just because it's not really been done since technically, yes, RuneScape Classic, when they were just big bundle expansions and randomly you would log in. It's like, oh, there's just like a fire making skill today. Here you go. It's like, oh, cool, okay. We don't really see stuff of that scale, but I know again it would never fly. I mean, we struggled enough just getting one skill out of the out the door on this one, so I think two might be pushing it.
Yeah, no, I think that especially in the context of what was going on, a year and a half ago now, when the skills were originally being polled to see if there would be a new skill. I think that was one of the things that Jagex very quickly realized is like, if we want a gathering skill, we can't really have without a production skill, which we can't really have without a gathering skill. You might be able to carve something up, but it would be challenging. And trying to pitch two different skills at the same time, like that's just nonsense talking right now. Let's just try and get one out the door. And so I think that's, again, kind of why Shamanism ended up being what it was, being a hybrid of the two. It's because there's no way that people would vote for two skills.
Yeah.
There's just no chance that option was going to fly.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, well, let's move on. So in short order, a poll is put out and the three skills are pitched against each other. And Sailing barely scrapes by above Shamanism and is voted in. How did you feel about how that situation went down? Because it was pretty contentious. Shamanism and Sailing were neck and neck, and Sailing just barely gets by, and a lot of people weren't super happy about that.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, from the get-go, that was always kind of the worry, or I guess there was one even bigger worry than that, which is we'd get like a three-way dead heat of like three popular ideas. Yeah. But like, it's, taking a step back in the grand scheme of things, I think approaching the player with multiple skill ideas in the first place and trying to roughly evenly flesh them out with a basic design overview, then letting the players pick their favorite. I think that was a nice direction to take it, certainly having followed on from like surveys to let players properly openly pitch their ideas first so they could collect their thoughts and see what the common trends were versus how they'd always done it previously with the three prior skills, I guess, the original like Artisan, Sailing and Warding in all the years prior, where they just kind of worked away at their own devices mostly and put them out, apart from Artisan, which came from, I guess, a series of first player submissions and then a player poll. Anyway, that was all such a long time ago now, but right. it had an interesting little development cycle of its own, but then never quite hit a popular stride. But I think this go around it was good, but this was always like the problem, right? Where it's like, what if multiple very popular ideas come to the forefront and they're just like neck and neck? Like, how do you make the judgment?
They're going to fight.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and they take away from each other even.
Yeah, that as soon as you start getting kind of camps forming and the tribalism comes out of people's human nature, it's like, oh dear. Now you're having like people wanting to sort of drag down one idea to prop up theirs, and pitting things against each other is never ideal. So that is a shame, but I think that was just that was the territory we were heading into, right? Like, that was the one distinct downside that we knew we were potentially going into with this direction, and it was just the sad reality we hit it. I guess in terms of like, how could things have gone differently, or should something have been done differently? It's tough to say. I mean, it's always very easy sitting here ruminating in hindsight with 2020, right? It's like,
absolutely.
It's like, oh yeah, we can always come up with the right decision a year later, so that's fine. But yeah, with all of that hindsight now, I think most people in the community would probably have liked it if there was just a straight up repoll of just Shamanism and Sailing. I think that would have cleared up any remaining like ambiguity in terms of like, because they were so close to each other. It's like, okay, well, how many people who liked Taming actually like Shamanism more than people who like Taming that like Sailing? And that could have just cleared that up and had a really like a nice unambiguous starting point, which I think would have benefited, well, both Sailing or Shamanism much more so than how it unfortunately ended up, where there's just that kind of lingering dissatisfaction from a fairly sizable portion of players who feel like they were a bit shafted. And it's difficult to say that they weren't entirely, because it did feel like it was probably close enough to justify that final like check-in to be like, okay, let's just see, what do you want, this one or that one?
Yeah, I think, yeah, no, I totally agree there. They were just so close. And even in the blog before, I don't think they specifically said they'd repoll the two contenders. If there were two close contenders, they pit them against each other. But they kind of implied something like that, that there'd be some sort of decision-making process that would involve the players. And then they just kind of went through and let sailing have its win. And yeah, that really didn't quite sit right with me. And the unfortunate thing is that I think the reasons they gave, which I can't remember exactly what they were, but they weren't all that strong. I think it was pretty much that they, well, no, I don't want to speak on their behalf because I can't actually fully remember. But yeah, I think whenever there's a contentious topic like this with a community, like the best thing you can do is just put it in the hands of the community again. Say, hey, you guys figure it out. If the community makes it a problem, well, that's the community's fault for doing it to themselves, right? Yeah. So, no, I definitely agree there. But at the end of the day, I do think, I do think from what we know, sailing has been the more popular one and has been popular for ages past. So I'm glad that it was the one chosen. I really didn't. I don't know if I can't say I didn't want shamanism at all, but I wasn't super content with the idea. Yeah. So anyway, that's a situation we landed in. But then you and I got some particularly interesting opportunities to work with this skill.
Yeah.
If for the viewers who don't know, we were involved in a lot of the marketing components of the sailing skill. So how did I can't recall, GentleTractor. Was this the first time you had worked directly with Jagex?
Yeah. Well, actually, I guess technically, the first time was just prior to this, with this whole conversation of the three skills, because they did reach out to me and was like, "Hey, can you put together a little infographic for each of these three skill pitches?"
Right.
So I did one
right.
basic one for both sailing, well, all three: sailing, taming, and shamanism. And that was definitely a interesting / admittedly slightly scary experience. No, they don't really seem like much on a surface level, just putting together some pictures and text and a little image post type thing, but it's all I'll say is you'd be surprised sometimes how the little things can add up, especially doing things under very, very tight schedules, getting information through fairly last minute, and there's a lot of things moving at rapid paces behind the scenes within the old school team at any given time. I think a lot of players maybe don't quite realise, or maybe these days they do a bit more, considering the pace of dev blogs that come out lately in particular. I think they can see there's a lot of stuff and a lot of moving parts at any given time. But anyway, yeah, that was my first experience with it, and it was definitely a bit of an eye-opening one, going from just having made a few little, what I'd consider to be dinky little personal projects and putting them out into the community, just leisurely taking my time on them, not really thinking too seriously all the time, and just being content having them be personal projects, and then going to like, okay, this is now for like, this is official. This is going out there into the world. It's got to represent not just
it's
me,
for
but
business.
Exactly, yeah. So it's got to represent Jagex in many ways. So like, that was the first challenge I had, before getting to the full sailing in-depth ones. The three skill pitches themselves was like, I kind of laboured over this idea of like, I've got to make sure each one of these three is like perfectly balanced. So I've got to make sure they're exact same kind of specs and size and rough information and text included and pictures included and little pixel art included. So like, we're trying not to overly weigh any one over the others for these three images in particular. And so I tried quite hard to sort of do that initially. Whether or not that was successful, I don't know. But like moving through that one, that felt, coming to the end of that, I was like, oh, okay, that wasn't too bad. The sailing stuff, coming into that one again, because it was quite open-ended to, in terms of what it would like fully include. I knew it was going to be this much lengthier refinement process, right? And there were going to be multiple topics within it, but kind of unclear as to what the extent of each one would necessarily be and how much information would be conveyed and all sorts of things there. So yeah, that's definitely a little bit of a, again, for me, it's a little bit anxiety inducing, always like going into something like that and a project being like, I think I can see what's going to be needed here, but I'm not 100% sure. And again, this is not really my field or area outside of just personal project hobbyist stuff. And like, I do not consider myself to be a graphic designer or an artist at all, but I've like weirdly found myself doing things adjacent to those two areas now. which just feels kind of wrong. But anyway, it is what it is. People haven't super complained at the minute, so I'll take that. But,
I think they've been very happy.
Well, that's
Very happy.
hopefully anyway. But yeah, I think starting into some of those, they were definitely a bit heavier going than I kind of maybe fully appreciated going into it. But no, I don't know. They sort of, I think they turned out okay in the end. Managed to get some nice like visual elements. But I'm very curious to know how about your on your end for like videos and whatnot, and yeah, how that felt from your perspective putting them together.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose to give a bit of context to the viewer, worked on a sailing plugin and sort of ideas pitch, probably in, I think it was January that year, and GentleTractor had some help from you with various components of that. And I pitched it to the community at some point in the form of a video. It was middling success. There were problems with it, definitely, and I'm very glad that we had the version that we're supposed to be getting now. Yeah, so that I did that just before that they had announced the 3 skill pitches. Before I think we knew about them. Yeah, before we knew about them as well. And so when it came down to sailing actually winning, I remember there was some point after that RuneLite had reached out, and she was like, "Hey, do you remember this video? Can you do that except for our process of refinement?" And I can tell you, it's one of the most intimidated I've been in my life was seeing that message and just thinking, I really want to do it, but I've made like 2 videos in my life. So I don't know. This multi-million-dollar company is reaching out to this complete amateur and asking them to essentially be one of the heads of their marketing for one of their most expensive projects to date. And it's like the pressure to say no to that because it did not feel adequate enough was immense. But I think I had eventually sat myself down and said, look, no, this is like a once in a lifetime chance to, I don't know, kind of break, well, maybe not once in a lifetime, but this is a big opportunity to break out of your shell and really just push the boundaries of what you think you can do. So maybe let's just go for it and see what happens. And if it turns out really poorly this first contract, then, well, they better have someone good for the next one.
Yeah, I know a lot of those feelings and thoughts. I think that's exactly how I was as well.
Yeah, and as you said, you are a professional artist in that you're very good, but you're not a professional in that it is your profession.
Yeah.
So it's and very, very much the same way for me with video making. So stepping out of our bubbles in that sense, having gone from these cool little community projects to being maybe not say in charge, but with a large degree of responsibility over the success of this project, that is very intimidating. And it almost doesn't help in a way that we're both very invested in the outcome of this project. We both really want sailing and we want it to work really well. And so, if it didn't pan out, it's, at least for me, that would almost be a reflection on me and my capabilities and my responsibility in part in this whole skill process. So yeah, very frightening that way.
Yeah,
but I think
get that feeling,
yeah, I think after the success of like the first round, because the sailing refinement process was split into like 5 different blogs, /videos /
like 4 categories, and then a big 5th like final summary.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think after the first round, and seeing the relative success of that, and seeing how people receive the video, that was very encouraging. Very encouraging.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it was fully justified. I'll give you some well-earned compliments just for a second, because I do think your videos were absolutely phenomenal. Like, as you were saying, it's a lot of fear, thinking, oh god, if I do a bad job, it's just gonna like sink it all. But I think yours absolutely did the opposite, where it's like, because the margins of passing was so close, I think your video was like a massive instrumental part of like probably allowing it to pass and getting people excited and interested in what it could be. You captured that imagination like greatly, that you can't really do just through static images, lines of text, big block kind of discussions or whatever. So yeah, he did a phenomenal job. So well done
Thank
you.
you. Yeah. I suppose it helps that I did have some background of programming, and which allowed me to start the very early processes of making my creators kit
Oh
plugin that you
yes.
can that's now out there, because that was the one of the motivations for taking the job with Jagex, taking the contract, was that I'd have a good reason to create this plugin idea that had been sitting in my mind for some time of being able to spawn characters in the game, like these fake characters, and be able to animate them and have them walk around and be able to make more complex things like a ship to present as part of a video or for any other creator. And so that was one of the things that consistently kept me going. If you watch the videos in order and like you pay a really close attention, you'll notice that the plugin grows as the videos release. Like every video release, the plugin advances by like several miles into the future, and it was one of the greatest incentives to kind of the incentive to do the contract was that I would be able to get to develop something crazy for the plugin and then immediately present it to the rest of the world pretty much. And that was ironically one of the things that kept me going. It was just having so much fun creating that plugin.
Yeah, if nothing else, then if people don't care about the sailing side of things, I think, as you say, that contribution of the creator kit now is absolutely phenomenal in and of itself. So yeah, bravo. I've always seen so many cool little things that different people have made with it. Just in the short span, it's already been a thing. So I know there are a bunch of content creators out there as well who have been loving using that for like easier access to their own video making stuff. So yeah, you did again another phenomenal job. Well done you.
Thanks. No, it has been really cool to see people pick that up and be able to make some pretty wild stuff out there. And if you watch closely, sometimes you can notice it in some videos you watch, like even some of the camera controls, which are some of the most basic parts of the plugin, to be honest. Sometimes you see someone just smoothly rotating around their character, and you wonder how that happens. Well, that's probably a little bit of creator's kit in there. But yeah, that's also been something that I still actively work on quite a bit, and still actively take feedback and suggestions for, and talk to content creators for. So that's been a really cool part of the past year, ever since starting the sailing project, for sure.
Yeah.
So how did you feel the community sentiment went around as sailing was refined? What did you think of that?
I think obviously early on, due to the both, as we mentioned, the contentious start of it, getting off head to head with shamanism, and then just the long-standing issues surrounding sailing as a concept, where it always had these big looming topics that had just taken kind of front and center stage, that people had dismissed it for the people who were dismissive of it anyway, had these like big ideas in their mind of it, like, oh, it's a mini game, it's whatever, dungeoneering at sea, it can't technically work, it's going to do this, that, or the other, whatever. I will say it was quite nice to see those kind of be what felt like kind of chipped away at. It felt like bit by bit, piece by piece, the answers were gradually given to the questions, and the problems that some people had were one by one being tackled as best as they could, like in terms of like preliminary designs and prototype and experimenting and whatnot, that the old school team did. So I think seeing that like gradually emerge from topic to topic was quite nice, although obviously it did make it difficult at times when there was something that people clearly wanted to know more about, but it was like, that's going to be more on that a bit later on in like X number of weeks or something, or the weeks turn into like a month or so, and it's like, hold on. That's like, that was where it got, I think, really tough.
Yeah, I think because the original intention of the release process was essentially to have each of the blogs release like every other week, I think it was. But eventually that got, I think it was after the core gameplay blog that had to be extended. We realized like how much was packed into that blog, and we needed more time to sort of digest the things that were being suggested, and what players expected out of the core gameplay and all the other types of activities to be involved in sailing. It was just like we can't pack that into a week, then do a week of production and have that blog and video and infographic out that fast. And so ended up Refinement ended up taking a lot longer than I think anyone anticipated, really. I think it was, it's a double-edged sword. You have to take that time because there was no possible way we could have gone quicker. There's no possible way these conversations could have just been skipped. But at the same time, yeah, there was a lot of confusion for quite some time, and even now, to be fair, about what sailing is, because that stuff was still being figured out. I think, I think most people, including especially the people on the team, had like a rough sketch of what each of these components involved. But until you actually lay it out on paper, you that's when you'll notice the finer details and be able to sort out all the little problems and questions that players are going to come up with. And even now, there's still confusion about what sailing is going to look like. It's not clear to absolutely everybody what it'll actually look and feel like to be on a ship that is rotating independently of the player, is moving independently of the player, moving around the sea. What does a turning radius look like? How does the wind impact your gameplay? These things, there's text answers for them, but there's not a feel answer. It's not tangible yet. And that, I think, plays into a lot of why not a lot of people talk about sailing right now. That's not surprising because it's been quiet the past while. I know the JMods, they're working, and I know that the current idea is we'll present when we're ready to present. Makes a lot of sense to me. But at the same time, it does leave a lot of questions, a lot of questions still to be answered.
Yeah, no, it is a rough one. I do not. I do not. I'm not jealous of their position that they're in. Quite frankly, the old school team, they're in a tough one to try and keep people happy, keep people informed, but not kind of overdo it in the sense of over committing to something that they don't have ready yet or anything they want to show. Because as you said, like they absolutely have so many things going on behind the scenes, and there's so much stuff, sailing or otherwise. And yeah, I'd like to hope, I'd like to be optimistic in thinking that maybe the average player, or at least the average kind of active player, understands that, yeah, this is a big topic, and this is quite an unprecedented one at that. We've never done a new skill at all, let alone a sailing one. So in order to do it justice, it needs some time to cook right in the oven. It's got to be. It's better for it to be done right than push it out quickly and try and do whatever the first iteration of something is that comes to mind and then just send it out the door. So I kind of hope that is how people kind of see it and understand it, and that it's probably a good thing that it can be slowly worked on. And then again, by the time they come out, and I mean they've said quite publicly that they would like to do proper like play tests with the wider player base at some point, and alpha testing and beta testing and different things like that. So I just hope people can go into that with hopefully an open mind and really think carefully about what it is they're like trying to test and figure out. And because there's absolutely going to be points where they just want lots of feedback on like the core feeling of things, like how do certain interactions feel, like is this the right direction of it? Because at the end of the day, much to contrary to conspiratorial beliefs, like the old school team absolutely want the same thing that we all want, which is just a good game with content that people actually want to play. Like they have no interest in putting out a bad update. They don't want to put out something that players don't want. So if there's like prevailing feedback for any topic, just like we see week after week, month after month with dev blogs and content that goes into the game that then gets tweaked and changed based on feedback, like they listen, they want to do that, and they want the players' feedback and input on everything. So yeah, I'm hoping when sailing starts to kind of like come together and coalesce a bit more tangibly, and some bits of it start getting into the players' hands, hopefully players can see that and understand it's like, right, this is my opportunity to like actually put it through its paces and give some hopefully well thought out and constructive criticism and feedback to try and mold it into something that is the best thing it can be, rather than just immediately be dismissive of it or just be like, this is crap, this is not what I expected a sailing skill to be, even though it's probably still in active development at that point in time and has no actual content yet to show off. But yeah, I'm just hoping people can kind of, whether it's just too optimistic of the wider player base, I don't know. I think they can be good at times. I think some of us get a bad rep, but who knows? I'd like to think, people can look at that and be judgmental in the right ways, right? Giving the right kind of feedback and criticism when it's warranted, and it will be warranted at some point in the not so distant future.
Yeah, I think something that both you and I are now acutely aware of is that managing expectations is incredibly important. the timing of when you present something to the players is critical to its reception, because if you present it too early, that impression leaves a mark, a mark that you really can't escape. Something that we could go into very shortly is the whole idea of forestry. I think there's some really base principles of forestry that are good, but how much can you really change that product now? It's got such a stain of expectation on it that it's practically this immovable beast, and the solutions you're kind of left with are leave it in as is or throw it out. So, and that's something that's very prevalent with sailing, in that you want to make sure that when you have something to show, it's the best possible version that you can, and it's not too early, because a significant amount of players' expectations are based on what they see. And I think we saw that with the tech demo that was released, around this time last year, I suppose. Was that a lot of people took the visuals of that tech demo very, very seriously.
Oh yeah.
Like incredibly seriously. And people, I think people can logically understand that it is a tech demo. It is it's supposed to be pretty simple and basic and unrefined. But I don't think a lot of people can emotionally separate the two. They see thing that doesn't look good, therefore it isn't good. It's not worth keeping. So yeah, and again, that's a battle really for the community managers of sailing to ensure that the communications are appropriately timed and are well done and are only done when it's something that they think is worth showing.
Yeah, the CM team is definitely the joint unsung heroes. I think of the community, they have a lot of like being the middleman kind of thing, the messengers, as it were, a lot of the time. They're the front lines having to respond and give feedback and take it and everything. They don't have an easy job. And again, just like one final point in saying that, the whole like testing and looking at alpha and technical kind of tests of stuff, I think that's also been a bit muddied by a lot of players do have a lot of expectations from like the wider games industry these days in terms of how like what a beta test looks like or what a early access build of something is, and there's lots of like warped perceptions now where kind of a lot of things that get used for betas or early accesses are basically just like either glorified demos or like this is the final game and we're just going to keep iterating on it, whereas it's actually quite rare for players to see the inner workings of like what a true tech demo or like an actual true alpha stage of something looks like, where it's like there are just bare bones components in here and basically everything you're looking at is going to be changed and there's no real meaningful content or not like fully fleshed out in the way that it would be when it finally hits a 1.0 launch date type thing. So yeah, there's all sorts of preconceived expectations and notions all kind of swirling around there. That's going to be a nightmare, just an absolute minefield to have to navigate. So best of luck to the CM team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think they've done very well so far, but man, it's got to be such an exhausting job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, something funny that I just thought of when you were bringing up the whole idea of the wider games industry is that, man, I think people ask in some places, like, sailing feels like it's possibly in development hell. And people are saying this at the end of last summer, right? So it's not a new idea, because I think Refinement took the time that it did. But I think something that people have to remember is that we are working on an old game with a lot of preconceived notions of what that game should be, a lot of expectations for what a large chunk of that game should be, a new skill. And it was kind of funny when doing the whole process of refinement, the videos that I was making, and I suppose in the same way the infographics you were making, normally a company, when they wanted to pitch an idea or a DLC to the players or whatever, what they do is they give a cinematic trailer, a gameplay trailer if you're lucky, but a cinematic one that, looks amazing. It probably looks nothing like the actual game will be. Just to rev up the hype from the wider gaming community.
Yeah.
Ours is very different. We used a plugin made by a guy in a single room to present gameplay footage that is not gameplay footage. It's in-game footage that does not remotely represent the actual gameplay. And it's just this funny little dichotomy, I suppose, between how we have to go through this process versus how another game might. And that process involves so much risk, I suppose, so many unique problems of its own that make it such a battle to try and pitch such a large idea as this.
Yeah, no, you're right. But at the same time, like I would say that's like such a weirdly old school way of doing it as well, though, isn't it? It's like it's what's charming about this game, in a way. And like, I mean, it is true. Like I put together a couple of little bits and some of the more significant like pixel artworks or some fake interfaces and things and mock-ups of like how I was like imagining things just as like an artistic impression of something, right? And I distinctly remember one of like the core devs and designers on the selling team were like, well, I didn't picture anything like that actually. That's quite cool. So I was like, oh, okay. Sorry, I guess. Whoops, my bad. Yeah. But it's like they, credit to them. They were pretty happy to be quite liberal and give us some free reign for, general creative freedom as long as it wasn't too far-fetched or outlandish in terms of what we were representing through videos and infographics. We, had a good scope to work with there. But yeah, it's a weird one. It's exactly as you say. It's not quite typical to what you would expect most game companies to do and how they would do it. But honestly, I'm quite happy that old school team do it this way. It makes for a more charming and very, very community centric and just a much more grounded feeling and communal feeling project, I guess, and game as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really good to point out, is that they are extraordinarily community focused. And the amount of creative freedom I had when making those videos, I was surprised. I was kind of shocked. I was like, so you're not going to give me a script. So I'm writing the script. And they're like, here's the blog that we've drafted up. You can write your script based off of this. And I would just kind of reorganize everything as I so chose. I would put bits and pieces there. I'd take some phrases, sometimes completely write my own, throw some suggestions back to them for making the blog. And they'd take it all into account. And it's like, this is really weird. I feel like you guys should have like some oversight, like more oversight over what I do. But they're just like, hey, no, go at it. I'd send the video and they'd always give feedback. And it was always good feedback. But it was always like, it was never like a ton, which either meant I, did good off the start, or they're just kind of like, yeah, just go at it. As you said, so long as you're not like completely misrepresenting what's going on, that it's all game. I think that reached I think that reached a bit of an extreme point because, again, part of the incentive to do these contracts with Jagex is that I get to experiment and do some insane things with Creators Kit. And so for the recent summit, the Winter Summit back in, I think January it was, again, they contracted me to do kind of like a bit of an update on where the sailing skill was at. And I just kind of went at it. I worked on some bits of Creators Kit for like importing static models from Blender. And so I had all these wild things going on in that video. I had these two guys driving in a car. I had a rocket ship. I had, these bizarre things. And yeah, they were just cool with it. They were just, I don't know, happy to see it was entertaining, I suppose. I think it'd make a big difference if it was like a more gameplay associated presentation in which you would expect to see more gameplay. There were some very mild gameplay elements in that presentation, but a lot of the narration had to be filled in with something. And so, yeah, that's where Creators Kit has been pretty good in that regard, and that's where they give a ton of freedom.
Yeah. No, that makes
and
sense.
They pay you. That was a question from some people, like, do you get paid? And it's like, yeah,
man, the amount of times I had to read comments. It's like, man, why are you like GentleTractor's like doing all this blah blah blah? It's like, no, this is commissioned, paid for work. It's okay, being well compensated for my time. It's all agreed. It's all contracted. I'm not just like giving a big corporation like dozens, if not hundreds of hours of time. It's like, no, that's
weeks
not
of my time.
Exactly.
But yes, no, I'm happy to do personal projects in my own time, with my own funds. But yes, if it's a company who's asking me to do something on their behalf, I would like to get compensated for my effort. I think like if they were asking for like, hey, can you do like a little 2-minute fun bit for our Twitter or whatever, I'd probably be like, yeah, I don't care. Sure, I'm just gonna have a fun time making it. But these videos were relatively long compared, like especially given the given the rapid style of editing I would do, and fairly detailed and required scripting and all that. So yeah, I'm definitely want to be compensated for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's maybe shift topics a little bit. I mentioned forestry earlier. So forestry had was split into two parts, three parts if you're daring. Where one part was released, I think, in the spring of last year. The second part was released in, if I had to guess, September of last year, somewhere around
Something
there.
like that, yeah.
Yeah. And it turned out to be a pretty contentious topic.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts of Forestry's release and where it is now?
Oh boy, yeah, it's... Forestry is like... I don't want to start off in like a depressing way, and I need to probably expand on what I say here, but like, forestry is quite a sad topic to me, but it's sad in terms of like, I'm sad that the community ended up feeling, I think, a bit dejected and disappointed, and I'm also sad for the sake of the developers and the team, because I don't think it went the way at all, how they were hoping or expecting, and not for like, because I don't think it's the kind of project that was like, inherently, we'll have to dig deep into it, but I don't think there's anything inherently like bad or malicious or anything
malicious.
Like anything
yes,
about like what they were trying to accomplish there. I think it was just a big series of events. So I think if you roll it all back, like forestry, in all honesty, I think it was originally, so it kind of started as like a game jam thing, and then it was like revealed properly at one of the summit events, I believe. And whatever summit that came with, I'm pretty sure I remember that being like kind of my personal headline update. It was like, oh, they're actually doing like a proper skilling update that isn't just like a mini game. It's like they've sounded like what the bits I picked up with my ear anyway. Like, oh, they want to do like proper the infrastructural improvements to the woodcutting skill. So it's like actually just chop in regular old trees. It's going to be just like a bit nicer. Take away the issues with like the lack of multiplayer friendly gameplay where it's like, do you want to chop another tree with someone else, or were you better off just hopping worlds? It's like, yeah, you're always probably better off hopping worlds. And just fixing issues like that, and the randomness involved in being able to click a tree and insta-fell it with one log and then be like, I've got to wait for that to respawn, find another tree or whatever. So like just the concept of like doing a proper look at a very old skill and saying, what if these little parts of it were just a bit nicer, played a bit more friendly with multiple people, and just like smoothed out the experience so it made sense and would feel like it, you know, belonged in a game that's being played today, right, in 2024, whatever we are now. And so like all of that sounded so positive to me. And again, as I say, it especially came off the back of it felt like a lot of skilling had devolved to like the way that you quote unquote solve skilling's problems is just like chuck a mini game at it and let people avoid the skill and just do the skill in a separate piece of content that kind of has nothing to do with the skill anymore. And we've seen that with a lot of things. I think mining has been really bad for that, where we've got like so many things in mining now, but they're all separate activities and mini games. Nothing has
fire
really
making too.
Yeah, exactly. And like nothing's really been done with like the core act of mining a traditional rock, not to any great extent anyway, and or like lighting a traditional fire with fire making, right? It's so from that angle, forestry was hugely compelling to me. I do think, you know, I still remember very early on hearing some of the earliest summit announcements and kind of game jam stuff where it's like, okay, a system of like random things that can occur while woodcutting, that sounds quite nice. I like the sound of that. Like if it's, you know, a bunch of kind of cool woodcutting themed stuff that can happen that sort of just distracts you momentarily to do, and then you do a bit of like interactive woodcutting for a brief moment, and then you go back to more laid back woodcutting. I can see that working quite nicely. And then it got a bit further. It's like, okay, there's quite a lot of systems here. They're pitching things to do with like leaves and making new things, like teas with effects and axes with unique mechanics. That's where I started to feel a bit iffy reading about some of them. It's like, okay, I'm not quite sure I see like the direction they want to go in with these, or like more importantly perhaps why. But I try to at least be open-minded and, you know, give the benefit of the doubt, especially ahead of time, right? Like unless you can actually play something in your hands, it's usually quite different trying to judge something just from someone's description of it, right? Things can turn out quite differently to how you expect. But I think therein kind of lied the problem of forestry, and when it all kind of started coming together is, I think it just did have to, you know, to summarize it at this point already, it had too many layers and too many things that were almost like, I'd say almost like too well entrenched in their designs the moment they were presented to the player. And so it was quite a lot of convoluted and complex things when all added together, even if each individual component could kind of be explained and justified relatively easily in and of itself. I think when you were looking at the full forestry package, there was a lot going on. And I think that it felt a bit different from a lot of regular projects and a lot of regular dev blogs and updates that get spoken about, where usually the conversation starts almost like a step earlier, where it's like, hey, here's like the outline of something we want to do, or what kind of ideas you have for this sort of thing. And I think forestry sadly would have benefited so much more if the first conversation had have been like, hey, what things do you want to do like while woodcutting? What would like a cool thing to happen to your character be while you're woodcutting there? Instead of what we did get, which was, hey, here's a list of things that will happen to you while you're woodcutting, and this is how they're going to work. And here is a list of rewards that you can make from these new things that you will obtain from this new reward shop that you will get. And it was like, it almost felt very like, you know, as I say, quite entrenched and locked in designs from the get-go. And it didn't feel like that player and community feedback or wiggle room there for molding and shaping a normal content update was quite hitting in the same way that it usually does for most projects. And I think that is what actually held it back the most throughout the process. If it just had have started a little bit earlier on by asking the players, like, what sort of interactions would you like to have in addition to like regular woodcutting trees as like little fun random events? What kind of reward systems would you like woodcutting to tap into? What additional uses for logs might you like to see? We just didn't really get that stage of it that needed to happen, I think. And it just sort of, it felt like spending a bit too much time during the dev blogging stage and then finally going into the game of a lot of almost like explaining and justifying why these design decisions were being made by the JMods, unfortunately, rather than having the nice kind of open and usually pretty good and productive back and forth that most updates tend to get. So I don't know, that was sort of my take on like all the pre-release stuff and the build up to it anyway. I don't know if you have anything else to say about that.
Yeah, no, I think I largely agree with you there, especially about the premise of forestry. You know, again, making community chopping a little more viable sounds good to me. Random events that associate with woodcutting makes a lot of sense to me. I think one of the things that I have nostalgia for, but I also really don't like, and I never really liked all that much, were the set of random events that we have, where you have these weird people pop out of nowhere and teleport you to this different universe where things happen.
Yeah.
And then they plop you back after they're done. I think the standout for me is Molly. Like what is this place? What am I doing here? Like, when I think of random events in games, I think of those in Skyrim, which are a little more naturally built into the world. Some of them are as basic as you come across two monsters that are fighting each other. Others are someone approaches you and asks for your money. Stuff like that, right? Or wandering traders. Stuff that fits naturally into the world. And so one of the more exciting premises of forestry was, hey, what if we give you random events that actually are relevant to what you're doing and are immersive and work better with the world? That, as a very basic idea, stripping all the context we have of forestry now, that is a very basic idea, really speaks to me. And I think there's a lot that you can do with that. I think the shock of forestry for me was, well, I didn't keep very closely up with its development, to be honest. I didn't read very deep into the blogs. I was busy doing other stuff at the time. I just kind of just thought of the premise and thought, hey, that sounds cool. Let's give it a try. I think when I logged in to try forestry for the first time, what struck me immediately was, first of all, there's a lot of players in one space. And those players are being sucked from everywhere else out in the world they could be and being shuttled into one tree or two trees or something like that. It's like, oh man, I like the idea of social woodcutting. This is Wintertod woodcutting though, and I don't know if I like that. What if there's a systems that we could, you know, we would gather around some trees and not just one tree?
Yeah,
that would feel nicer. The other thing was the event spam. Events were so common. You weren't woodcutting, you were forestrying.
yeah,
When I thought of random events or woodcutting, I thought we take the frequency of current random events and we apply that to woodcutting. It's just these one-off little things you find here and there, help flesh out the world, and give you some cool rewards for engaging with it. That seems pretty good to me. And yeah, Forestry wasn't that. And a lot of the events were just really strange. Like, some of the things that you were expected to do was just, I don't know. Some of like the really magic-y elements is like, man, this used to be just simple, more mundane, I suppose, not so fantastical. And I don't know if I really want like this heavy fantasy theme in the act of chopping a tree.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it, it's not fun to be like hyper negative about stuff at all. But
No.
like at the end of the day, I think my honest opinion of it is like out of all the events we have now, I kind of feel like the only event that both makes sense to me and feels good to me is like the Rising Roots one, because that one is still like you are fundamentally performing a wood cutting interaction. It's, you know, some root wood, but it's still wood. And also you get a bit of bark from it, which makes sense because you're chopping wood. And then you have a really nice kind of organic gameplay element that is intuitive, that doesn't need teaching to the player, because they just see this green infused one appear shortly after they spawn. It's like, oh, why is there one green one? Click it. Oh, look, I'm getting more bark. Oh, neat. So it's just like, it's so well, just simply designed, very basic RuneScape-y, point and click, interact. You're still doing the woodcutting skill. And it just feels so nice the way that was integrated into it. And that's the kind of thing that I would have loved to have seen more of. But yeah, as you say, then it's like the rest of them just really go off into strange directions where immediately it's just, this is very overtly not anything to do with the woodcutting skill. It's like, I'm applying compost to a sapling. It's like, we literally have the farming skill that is built around that. Why is this giving me woodcutting XP? And has a big weird interface pop up and a strange kind of percentage system you've got to figure out, and you're clicking on different items that have spawned randomly around you, and then multiple colours of flowers, or they weren't even multiple colours, I don't think, at the start. I think that had to be added in retroactively. But yeah, just like things that then boil down to like RNG clicking. It's like you're clicking on this and clicking on that, and then the game says, nope, that's wrong. Okay, I guess I'll just click again. No, that one's also wrong. I'll click that and that. No, okay, now you got it. Cool. And it's just so many of the gameplay loops of the individual events themselves just unfortunately just genuinely didn't feel fun. Like the Entling giving some haircuts to them, again, that starts to stray off into, I can kind of accept it as like quirky RuneScape-y rather than super high fantasy, although it is sort of blurring the lines a bit. But it's just like such an annoying gameplay loop, having to see like a line of text above a little moving entity's head and then right click an op to get it, and then rapidly click it multiple times over. And yeah, so there's so many like clunky interactions. And as you say, like the standout one to me that just feels so bizarre would be like the Dryad event, where these big brightly coloured circles and shapes and symbols just get strewn across the landscape around you, and you go and just stand on like the odd one out basically. And it's like, why? Like, why? This is so like gamifying the system. Like there's nothing immersive. Exactly. It's so like removed from just, I'm a woodcutter with my axe chopping a tree. It's like, no, there's now just big flying, like flashing shapes on the ground, and I'm clicking on it, and it doesn't synergize with the core woodcutting loop because the items, the shapes spawn away from the trees usually. So it's like you're just sort of standing there like a bit of a lemon for multiple seconds, unless you kind of you try and time it right to just go and click on it before it ticks over to the next cycle, but there's no visual indicator when that's going to be, so you're just kind of guessing. And it just I really just don't get the core design, unfortunately. And that's where, sadly, we mentioned with sailing stuff about upcoming like play tests and beta testing, which I think they are absolutely 100% committing to doing. Sadly, Forestry had like 2 rounds of betas, both cancelled. Though there was again a lot of conspiracies surrounding that as well, where people thought, oh, this is like Forestry, I don't know, whatever. It was just sadly to do with their like, they'd completely transformed their beta infrastructure to like, I don't know, there's a lot of tech stuff that goes over my head, but anyway, they were really like separating out how a beta server works and what a beta world is. And sadly, they just hit multiple snags and bumps in the road that they couldn't release it. But in hindsight, sadly, I think the correct decision would have been to not go ahead without a beta. It would have been to like delay Forestry until they could do it all together and properly test it and get lots of player feedback on board before it got into the game. Because I do think a lot of issues probably could have been addressed if that had happened. So, but yeah, like the events themselves are just sort of, they're so far removed. And I get like it's called the Forestry event and not just like woodcutting, but the fact that they were spawned exclusively from woodcutting, I think if you wanted to do like a forestry system where it did have like an eclectic mix of different skills involved, then it probably should have been involving different skills from the get-go, and have like, you know, a forestry system that also spawns when you're catching hunter creatures or something, or when you're farming crops. And if you actually wanted to do like a cross-skill update like that, again, that would come with its own problems. But yeah, for me, it's like I would have so much preferred to have seen forestry events that focused on being a woodcutter first and foremost, having simple, intuitive gameplay loops that sadly these events didn't have. And yeah, I think it got too awkward, too unpleasant and unfun gameplay, and just too weird fantasy immersion breaking for my liking. But
yeah. I mean, I'll say that I think I don't mind the fact that there's other events that occur while woodcutting. I do kind of agree with you that, you know, shouldn't these be maybe a little more broad than just woodcutting if they're not specifically woodcutting related? But the idea of something more subtle and immersive spawning, you know, someone happening to come along, and you have a chat and you get a reward for doing something, whatever. I don't mind that principally. I do think it's weird, though, especially that a lot of the skills that you use for these events are not given experience, like the sapling and all that. You're rarely awarded the right kind of experience for the events that you do. And that was one of those things that felt like they were kind of shoehorning woodcutting experience into places that it didn't belong, or missing out on other skills that should have been present.
I think sorry, just to add on that topic, because I think they did add like basically like a token XP drop for a bunch of different skills alongside the woodcutting XP drop as like one of the final updates to it. But it's sort of like a bit, it almost feels weirder that way when you do like
why is the woodcutting there?
Exactly, yeah. It's like, now I'm getting a tiny little farming bit for helping a sapling, and then a big chunk of woodcutting. It's like, why? So it's still weird going in the other direction with it.
Yeah. And I think, maybe to try and sum up the events, they felt obtrusive. Whereas when I think of random events in a game, again, like Skyrim, I think of immersive.
Yeah.
Where they feel like natural things that can happen, and not kind of what I wanted to avoid in the first place, Molly dropping out of nowhere and whisking you away to another dimension.
Yeah.
You know, the forestry events that we have aren't quite like that, but they're not where I wanted them to settle, for sure.
Just quickly as well, just to expand on one thing you said a bit earlier too, it's like, you mentioned about, you know, the multiplayer experience of first starting forestry and seeing like a horde of people all at one tree. And that's where I think there was like a big, I think the ball was dropped, to put it lightly, where it's like, the events themselves just straight up don't work well with lots of people there, because it requires seeing ground spawned items and clicking on precise things, and that just doesn't work when there's lots of people standing over everything. And now it becomes like exclusively like RuneLite plugin, big flashing overlay territory to make it playable, and that's like a really, really bad sign, I think, when you have to like lean on a plugin to make content not just like more comfortable or quality of life, but just like playable, which to me it felt like it was necessary. So yeah, that was like a big misstep where the content just didn't feel like it was tested with mass multiplayer in mind at all.
Yeah, for sure. Now I'll give that with the more recent forestry update, you know, what some people like to call part 3. They did help reduce a lot of that, just by changing how the algorithm decides when and where a forestry event spawns, and kind of how close you have to be to that tree, essentially, to be able to participate. And it's caused people to spread out a bit more. I recently did, because I started an Iron Man not too long ago, not actively playing it, but I was playing it pretty hard for a good couple months, partially because I wanted to test out the new Jagex client, and also wanted to test out some of the updates that I haven't really gone deep into. And so I did try forestry for quite some time. And we were all cutting near Sinclair Mansion. Don't know if that's still what they do these days. But yeah, people were kind of nicely spread out. There was at most maybe 12 people at a tree. But other than that, there was a good dozen trees being chopped simultaneously. People were distancing themselves, because that kind of triggered the algorithm the best way to be able to spawn events for people to participate in. And that felt a lot better. And I want to say, the events themselves, the gameplay, I don't mind most of them. I think it's really hard to make little events like this that actually have deep gameplay. I think it's pretty tough. Like, I know, like, for example, the bushes, you have to randomly click the two, then run between them. I, it's not great that you're just randomly clicking bushes that are irrelevant, that are just there to annoy you. But once you get into a good rhythm of finding the two right ones, clicking between them is kind of nice. You just kind of keep racking up the rewards, and until the formula changes again, two different bushes are selected.
Sure, yeah.
And so that I felt was fine. The druid one, yeah, a little awkward. Once you can time it right, you can leave your tree just as soon as the reward has been given by standing on the right glowing tile, and then you're not standing there for so long. So there's things I didn't dislike them. I was fine with the gameplay. It's just everything around that. I think that's really kind of irked me.
Yeah, I will say on that one as well, just like talking about the way that forestry meta shifted then, if that, as you say, with the final incarnation of it, I think if that had been how it started, it would have gone down a lot better. And if everything had been properly designed and balanced and factored in for like to function and spawn events like that and have to be nearby and everything, I think that would have made more sense. I think the journey it took to get there, sadly, is what massively dented its like public opinion and has now forever tainted it as well. Yeah. I was going to say something controversial. I will actually. Just before, yeah, so it went through like shifts, right? As players figured out what you could do and standing in bulk and spawning things in different places, and players figured out very quickly that actually you can just like stand in the best spawning set of trees and have lots of people coordinate across lots of worlds, and we can just like world hop rapidly at the same trees and just hit up all these events. That gameplay I thought was awful, because I'm very much against any sort of like world hop designed gameplay, because I think that's just terrible in general.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have to hop between different servers to do things. That's just no. But they did eliminate that at some point, I guess after batch 1, I think, or between batch 1 and 2, or after batch 2, I forget when now. There's so many changes. But they changed it, and a different meta emerged where it was like the teleport meta. It's like, okay, we'll all converge onto one world, but then spread ourselves out to every conceivable notable woodcutting location that's reasonably near a teleport spot. And then they formed like a clan chat around it and everything, and like a chat channel and a community formed and stuff. And I did get a bit involved in that, and I'll be honest, this is maybe my hot take. I actually really enjoyed doing that, like for a while, getting stuck in with that gameplay. It was in no way, shape, or form intended, and I don't think it was the right fit for like what they wanted to do with both woodcutting and forestry and update. But I found it like super compelling, like paying attention, and it was at peak times like ridiculously high intensity, because you're like watching the chat like a hawk and having to see these decipher this shorthand, that language that had been come up to say like, oh, these trees in this region at this time on this world. It's like, oh, okay, quickly go, or not this world rather, but at this place, quickly teleport to it, make sure you got your inventory set up, go there, take part in the event you want to. It's over in 30 seconds. You'd already had like 2 other events spawn in the chat. You got to quickly decide which one you're going to go teleport to next. And it was just super fast paced. And I was like, if you're looking for that piece of gameplay intentionally, then I think there is some fun to be had about that. And I think there is also something to be said about community-driven initiatives, and I guess in a sense emergent gameplay as well that is very community-driven, because that absolutely was like you had hundreds and hundreds of people all like forming their own community, forming their own systems, and handling the kind of gameplay in their own way and taking control of that. And I kind of like that. I just don't think it was right for forestry, and I don't think I think again, this is where my hot take is, I think I would have preferred that than what it is now. That's my real hot take.
Interesting.
Not least of all because of like the quite catastrophic nerf. I'm not sure if there's ever been a piece of content nerfed as heavily in terms of like the reward output and the time it takes to complete stuff now. Like if you did that method of teleporting versus doing it now to try and get some of the unique items in the bark, it's like you're talking like potentially spending hundreds of hours longer now versus what it was previously. It's like crazy how bad it is now. So I think that's left a lingering distaste, maybe in my mouth, because I did that for quite a while, and now thinking about going back and getting the last few things on either my Iron Man or a main account or something, it's like, I don't know if I want to bother, because it's like, I know it's going to take me roughly like 10 to 50 times longer now, and I've just got to do AFK woodcutting to have them spawn as well. So it's like, I can't even do anything to physically speed it up. So that kind of sucks, actually. But yeah, so like for me, it's that combination of like, I just don't think that was right for the forestry and woodcutting update. And in all honesty, if they had like massively cut the woodcutting XP you get but kind of leave the rewards, I think it could have found an interesting equilibrium of like people mass doing events and working together to teleport around. in order to just generate reward output and have more like a GP centric thing where people could buy forestry rewards and sell them on and get good GP per hour maybe. But the traditional woodcutting would be like, tick manipulating teaks, whatever, for like your optimal XP would still be like the runaway clear like option of that. I think there could have been a better spot found for it, but yeah, that would be my hot take anyway. I actually kind of weirdly enough preferred that one, but I think in order for gameplay loops like that to work at their best, I think they need to be kind of designed from the ground up, at least partially with that in mind, so people know going into it what it's going to be like and why it's working like that. And just thematically, it was a bit off, as you already mentioned, all the different issues with like seeing events pop up that quickly and having a horde of people doing things all at once. It didn't really gel well, but it's an unfortunate one how it's sort of been left now, because I do think that's almost hurt it even more now that it's left at its final incarnation versus if it had have been the current final incarnation it is now from the start. I don't think it would be perceived anywhere near as badly as it now is. But
yeah. Oh, that's good you say that, because in general, I really do like seeing emergent gameplay. I like seeing players experiment with the mechanics and be able to optimize their performance as a result of doing so. I do think you have to have some limits. Like if you're performing twice as well, getting twice the GP or XP from doing this weird little exploit, then I think that's definitely something you should clamp down on. If it's 10% better and you're working with the community to do it and you're jumping around and teleporting, yeah, that sounds great to me. As you said, it is unfortunate that the rebalancing hasn't really taken into account kind of how well players are doing while they're able to world hop or teleport around to rack up all the events quickly. I think that's really too bad that they didn't act quicker to, as you kind of said, very clearly state what this update was supposed to be,
absolutely,
and very, very quickly patch out what it's not supposed to be.
Left it for such a long time, so many months.
Yeah, because I think if you had said right from the get-go, hey, this world hopping and teleporting business, this is not what Forestry is supposed to be, we're patching it out, I don't think players would really complain. They'd be like, hey, few people abused it, whatever, it's not a big deal. But now that it has all this context of people building communities around these things, now it feels like you're really taking away something that they had, something good and something fun.
Yeah, no, I think it's a shame when you have like just the duration of time that was left up. I think like as you mentioned, like being able to tackle something promptly, I think is kind of crucial without letting like a meta establish. And there have been a few instances over the years, obviously, where things have lingered a little bit too long, perhaps, and it's just a shame when things then have to be heavily disrupted. And even if the ending point is maybe closer to where it originally was intended to be, and it's the journey it took to get there was just not so nice. It's just a shame. Like I do agree in principle, like that both, especially the world hop and like the teleport metas of Forestry were like not ideal, but it's just that weird quirk for me personally anyway, doing a bit of the teleport one, found it oddly enjoyable. So I'm not like opposed to that style of gameplay loop of like working with players and traveling around the world to do something, but again, probably would be more fitting for like a different skill, a different piece of content or gameplay entirely.
Yeah, I suppose I wonder like how people would receive a random event overhaul. It's like not event specific, just looking at our current set of random events, and asking like, is this something that we're really enjoying? Do you really like going and popping balloon animals with Pete, Prison Pete? Do you enjoy going fishing with Bob? I suppose people do because it gives experience. Can we replace that with something else that gives equal experience? Just asking, why are these things here in the fashion that they are? Could we take some of these random events, put them in a little pocket dimension where you can go visit them again? And maybe replace them with something maybe a bit more immersive, maybe a bit more enjoyable.
Yeah, but they still exist in such a weird spot, obviously being like anti-botting and anti-macro devices at their core. So I guess there was never really a strong thought put on like, does this feel fun and does it feel appropriate? Because they kind of intentionally wanted to like disrupt the player, pull them out of the game world, put them somewhere else, and have that. So having a proper like random event system that was built from the ground up to just be like fun and integrated into what you're doing and why you're doing it, and that would be quite cool to see. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm like a sucker for the old aggressive random events as well, seeing the mayhem and the carnage that used to happen, like fishing spots and stuff. Someone went AFK too long and the river troll comes out, it's like, oh, he's gonna get him, he's gonna get him. So I do
so excited.
Genuinely miss that a lot. Like I wish even at a bare minimum it would be lovely if you could just like optionally toggle them back on. I know there's no logical or efficient reason why you'd want to, unless you went and created like a bespoke new reward system for them that
It's
made
a
them worth
collection
doing.
log. That's it.
Exactly, yeah, more clever. It's had the Staler baguette, right? Even more
Yeah.
stuff. Oh dear, that'll make them happy. But no, just even in principle, like I mean, heck, I think that can make a fun concept for like going way off topic, but like an even harder, like hardcore Iron Man type mode, where it's like you have some sort of new event system that's just passively permanently switched on. That works kind of like the random event system, but it's just like all scary, aggressive stuff that can like spawn at you while you're doing anything in the world. So it's like, no, don't go AFK on your hardcore, because this whole thing here, a dragon might swoop down and start fighting you, or a demon might spawn out of a portal or something, like some crazy like game-wide interaction. That would be, I don't know, that'd be quite cool. Or maybe even just like a weird like league concept that might be fun for as well.
Yeah. Oh, that would be funny. Yeah, I'd actually like to point out, it's good that you're remind us that random events were originally intended to stop bots.
Yeah.
Well, as like a, I don't know, 7, 8-year-old kid at the time, they're pretty good at catching 7 or 8-year-old kids too. Especially for someone who didn't have the context of the game. And, you know, some of the low poly models are pretty low poly. It can be kind of hard to tell what they are. I remember, I think specifically the Grave Digger random event, finding the coffin for the gardener, I think it is, where you have the plant pot. I always confused that with some type of cooking pot, and so I would get it wrong.
Pot ones, yeah. No, that's like a
same
valid
thing with the
one
sandwich. Yeah, same thing with the sandwich lady. I don't know if it was made easier since back then, or if I was just really confused. Or maybe I just didn't know what a bread roll was. That's a completely viable answer. But that sandwich lady got me so many times, man. Like she was vicious, that one.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, they had to completely rework. Well, not completely, but quite extensively rework the interface of like the beehive one, right? Because it was like the weird sort of way you put it in place, and it wasn't obvious, and people, like, it was stumping legitimate players more than it was bots. So clearly not working as intended. Even now, I think it still gets people a bit confused. It's not the cleanest or clearest UI or interaction in general. So yeah, having a proper fun new look at random events would be quite cool. But again, it does make me wonder and worry a bit if like Forestry has sadly left a bit of a negative taint on the idea of like events and random things occurring. That kind of sucks if that has left a lasting negative impression, which I do worry it probably has.
Yeah, I would say, if anything, just give it some time to rest before we can kind of approach that topic again. Because, I think if you started talking about changing random events now, people would get pretty upset pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But anyways, speaking of leagues, there was recently, I think, a Leagues 4, this sort of Trailblazer Reloaded bit.
It was, wasn't there?
That was quite the explosive event. We hit a player... what do you call it? A player count peak with the release of Trailblazer Reloaded.
Yeah.
I knew that Trailblazer was popular. I didn't understand that it was going to be that popular.
No, it's kind of crazy how many people do get back into the game. I think that's like a big lure of it, isn't it? Like returning players who perhaps more like seasonal type players, which I think is super common amongst RuneScape players in general anyway. Like it's a game that's kind of built for that, right? Like playing for a few months or whatever and then coming and going. But Leagues is like a big event that a lot of people always want to like check out. And yeah, there's something just like deeply compelling clearly about if I had to pin it down to one thing, it's probably largely just like the power fantasy side of things with the relics, and then the progression where you can just like zip through the game from scratch and get really deep into it in just a few weeks. That is obviously something that a lot of the average or more casual skewed player base, that's the type of thing that realistically can take years to get to, right? Like there's some people who will play small amounts and not even get to the point of being able to like see a raid dungeon in any realistic or feasible amount of time. So for them, it's like a league is suddenly like this huge opportunity which only comes out like once a year or two. So it kind of makes sense on that level, I think, why they can be as popular as they are. And clearly the Trailblazer format the first time around a few years back worked very well and was super well received. And sadly the one just preceding this one, the Shattered Relics, not so much. I think that highlighted some issues with like what a Leagues format should be and what it should or shouldn't perhaps do. And clearly like the success of this one again kind of reinforces like, okay, yeah, you need some like I think anyway, what I could garner from wider perception and the public opinion was a league needs like some degree of limitation and restriction that's like quite
Yeah.
permanent. It has some impactful choices and things that you have to, go down a particular path for. Whereas, the Shattered Relics League before it just sort of essentially just opened up the whole game, but made it slightly more cumbersome with this weird interface you had to constantly toggle things off and on in. And it just, it was an odd one. And I think, Trailblazer just hit it home with the really simple gimmick concept that you can super easily understand, intuitive, and then the fun power fantasy of big, meaty relics that transform your gameplay. And I certainly had a lot of fun with it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I was very busy at the time, so I really didn't engage with it, unfortunately. But I definitely read a lot of talk about it. And it kind of came to mind that I think some of the founding principles of leagues, kind of as was set by Twisted League and has been propagated by the more popular leagues we've had, is that A, it's power fantasy. B, it changes how you play. I think that second one is really important because as much as people want the power fantasy, they don't just want what you do right now, but faster. Well, maybe some people do. They want a different experience. They want something new and fresh. And I think that's what Trailblazer originally did really well.
Yeah.
And it seems that Trailblazer Reloaded really followed in those footsteps while giving possibly even more exciting power fantasy to go with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think, it's those combination of things, as you say, that it creates for an interesting one to think about, though, in terms of, like, there's definitely a distinct divide, because there's some people I've seen who are, I guess, to just put it into broad camps, like the more hardcore, veteran, like super committed player who look at something like a league and they really want the emphasis to be on restrictions and like unique features that make it like a harder experience than what they're used to. They want to make a hard decision. They don't want it to be like really easy and obviously laid out for them. So they almost want to play like a harder mode version of what the current game is. Whereas, as you say, like there's some people who probably would be strictly happy with just power fantasy. Here's the base game, but you're more powerful and it's faster. And it's like, in some ways, those two are kind of contradictory design philosophies. So leagues currently sort of like walking a bit of a tightrope, trying to like please the two. I think, again, like a Trailblazer style format does a pretty good job of it for the most part. And obviously it
got 200,000 players.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Pretty well.
It definitely did, yeah. There's no denying that. So clearly there's like, it's already hitting a great spot, but it does make me wonder like if that, like what direction should it continue heading in? Can they keep kind of accommodating both of those sides of things? Or should there ever be a point where it's like spun off almost into two things? Like, I guess in a way you've got a dead man mode that's already very, very, I would say, quite inaccessible in terms of like, I don't think many casual players are ever really going to dip their toes into dead man other than maybe like a little cursory glance, poke their head in, get killed, promptly leave once they realize they lose a lot of stuff and then dip out of it. But I do wonder if that's like, if leagues is still going to be the format to like accommodate both of those sides of things.
Yeah, I mean, as I just said, I think Trailblazer's done pretty well, given just how insanely popular it was and how well praised it was. I think it did quite well at maintaining that balance. However, you can absolutely say that there's an appeal to strictly challenges. I mean, just look at all the alternative game modes that we have. Iron Man from a basis is just kind of what you do as a main, but a lot harder. Now, it does change a lot of your gameplay cycles, but you have access to the same amount of content. You just have to put a lot more work into attaining all of it. And I definitely think there would be something really interesting about, let's say, let's call it a mini challenge league that happens once every 12 months, but in the summer instead of the winter. It's 3 weeks of hell. Kind of like the league idea that you gave before, where if you had all these monsters spawning on you all the time, you had to be constantly on edge. You had maybe one life, or each time you die, some parts of you reset, and maybe you're restricted to a certain number of inventory spaces, or you could take inspiration from one of the many challenge series, Snowflake series that are out there, and say you're restricted to a certain environment for at least a time. I think there'd be a lot of fun to be had there, but there's no, like, you can't replace the power fantasy of a league with that
Yeah.
challenge, right? If you're going to do a league, I think you have to blend the two. You can't, but people are expecting that power fantasy. And so I think there's an appeal somewhere out there, maybe in some sort of official private server, which I won't do that topic again,
Oh, dear.
where people would be able to set up their own challenges. I think that'd be really cool and really fun. I don't
Yeah.
see it lasting like 6 weeks, mind you. I see it lasting a couple weeks before people get tired of getting tossed around and beaten up. And the half XP league, that was a really rough one. People got tired of that one pretty quick, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even now, like with the current leagues, like it's already like that 6 to 8 week window is already kind of pushing it a little bit.
Long.
I think it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, for the most part, like I know it's a bit different for people who want to like push those ranks and go for like trophies, and they see it more as that like challenge grind kind of thing. They might be appreciative of the extra time. Well, especially with the change to like a static threshold system, which I think was a good move in principle. I think the one before, based on how I'd seen some people react, where it was the ever-moving goal of trying to stay in the top, whatever, 1% or something, that just looked harrowing, the people who were putting themselves through that. And when they announced like an extension to the third league, it's like, here's another 2 weeks. So they're like, oh no, I've got to like sacrifice all my life for another couple of weeks. Oh God.
Yeah.
So clearly that was not a super healthy, maintainable thing. So I think the static thresholds was the right change there too. But I mean, even you just listing some of those different concepts for stuff, it makes me so curious to know what direction they'll go in. Obviously, for lack of a better term, with Trailblazer Reloaded, they played it safe kind of thing. They brought back a previous, clearly very popular league and just did a little iteration on it. But I do hope Leagues doesn't end up falling into the pitfall of just being Trailblazer. It's just a region lock in different ways each time. Because I think that would be kind of like squandering the opportunity of what Leagues presents. But equally, man, that's really tough to like properly envision and design what good, compelling, and like what an actual league concept that would work would look like. That makes the game feel different, feel challenging, still have the power fantasy option, but transform the game in a way that's actually also viable to develop and not going to take up like an inordinate amount of time to make. Because there are some really cool concepts I've seen of like, oh man, wouldn't a league that takes you like back in time and you're battling in like the third age and the full kind of God Wars battling all over the world, and it's like, that would be really cool. It would also require remapping the entire map, so probably not going to happen. But it's depending on how grand a scale they want to get with stuff and what cool things they could do. I'm very curious to see what the future of Leagues holds. I could see them almost doing a bit of a rotation, because I think Trailblazer is almost definitely going to be one that just sort of like periodically comes back, because it's just proven to be popular, and there are loads of little ways they could keep iterating on it to do like a small change and change a starting zone, give people access to different. I mean, even just with Varlamore out, one extra zone to pick from, that would shake things up dramatically, and all the new content that gets added in between everywhere. But yeah, I would still like to see them commit to like hopefully innovating and trying experimental things, even if it don't always work out as well. I think there's value to doing that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, I'll fully admit, my favorite league was the Twisted League, because I'm a simple man, and the choices involved in Trailblazer are a little overwhelming for me.
Yeah.
What I really liked about Twisted was that everyone was together in a relatively small space. It really felt like everyone is coming together to play this little offshoot game mode where nothing was figured out, nothing was planned, because no one had any idea what was coming, really. And we just kind of figured things out together at the same time in the same environment. And that I found to be really fun. But again, I don't like to have a ton of big choices. I'm fairly simple that way. And so I enjoy that format quite a bit. Now, that is quite the controversial opinion. I think if you ask just about anybody, they'll say they enjoyed Trailblazer more than Twisted, if they play Twisted at all. That was definitely my experience.
No, it was a lot of fun, and I think that's one that, I mean, I could also see that being returned to one day, right? Again, I already mentioned like Varlamore, like doing a full-blown continent locked thing when that's fully completed. And I mean, man, I'll still cross my fingers, say my usual broken record take of like, maybe one day Kurend will be fully fleshed out and reworked and finished to a satisfying degree as well, with the remaining cities there. And if that ever hypothetically happens and we have like a nice cool, awesome finished Varlamore and a proper finished Kurend and big lengthy quest lines and individual quests scattered throughout, that would be like that would make a proper cool Twisted League Redux, or like I guess at that point it would have to be like a shining Twisted League or something to reflect like both regions or whatever. I mean, heck, maybe that's like yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say maybe that's even a fun, different spin. Actually, now I've said that, like with two big kingdoms, maybe that's the only choice a player makes. It's like, are you Team Kurend or Team Varlamore, and have like a weird,
oh man,
kingdom versus kingdom on one land map. I don't even know what that would look like gameplay wise, but anyway, yeah, there's fun things they could do there. I imagine one day they might return to that as well once the land mass is looking a bit fleshed out. And also, I mean, man, I haven't even mentioned like sailing and the implications of that on a league or a region locked format. Like, what does that look like? A sailing league? Do you want to like access boats and sailing locked? I don't know. There's a lot of options, a lot of weird things that are going to mean probably future leagues are going to look potentially quite different. So that's quite exciting alone to me anyway.
Yeah. Now that you kind of mentioned this sort of region versus region, it comes to mind, like at the end of every league, nothing happens. Everyone just drops their items and says, yay, the league is over. Like, they can surely turn the world to PvP for just like, a couple hours. Just
that would be so good.
Let people have it out at each other with all these like insane relics and other buffs and all that, and just see the chaos that occurs as a result.
Or again, we mentioned like the random events and spawning aggressive monsters. Like they did the breaches system with Deadman, where it's like big bosses and super large creatures spawning out of that. Like, that should be like a finishing sequence of League, right? Like the world just gets
like a
overrun.
zombie horde mode.
Exactly, yeah. It's just like there's too many, it's too overwhelming. And then when people die, put them in a jail like they used to do on Deadman when it's like the final hour. So it's like, who could be the last person standing in the League? That'd be such a fun way to round out the league. It would, wouldn't it?
That'd be really good. And like that, one of the problems with Deadman, and I think people enjoy Deadman because there's build up to it. At the same time, that's one of the frustrating parts. If you want to engage in Deadman, you have to work hard for it. If you want to compete, you don't just have to be a good PvPer. You have to really commit yourself for several weeks to growing to be able to have a chance at making it to the final place. And then you also have to be part of a clan, but that's another conversation. In a format like this with leagues, everyone's kind of building up that way anyway. There's no competition on the way. Everyone's sort of already working in that direction, and there's no way that you can get knocked down. So I think, it's just such a fun idea.
Yeah, hopefully they do something like that now. I've gotten quite excited about the thought of that. So hopefully they do.
No, that's good. Yeah, actually, I on a slightly related topic, I did one of the videos, I guess the video introducing the league.
Oh, yeah.
Or at least maybe not introducing the league. I can't remember what other videos there were at the time. But I did an advertising one which had 10 content creators discussing one of the 10 regions.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
That was a pretty fun project to do. I quite enjoyed that. I was working with the recently inaugurated Mod Hootie at the time, who was helping me compile footage and reviewing the work that I had done. And that was pretty good. I quite enjoyed doing that. Very busy. Oh my goodness. I think I underestimated how much time it would take, because I think the estimate given to me is that each content creator is going to have a 2-minute video voiceover clip to give to you, and you just have to put the visuals to it and add an intro and outro. Well, turns out some of those content creators have a very generous 2 minutes. And they, some of them would just kind of keep going. Oh my goodness, Eevescape, the first one I got was just about 3 minutes. I don't think they realize how deep and lengthy that it takes to edit that, at least in the style that I do, this style that Jagex now comes to me for, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I think I was given 1.5, 2 weeks, and I was pulling some 12, 14-hour days for a good solid 10 days straight, just putting together this video. Never told Hootie about it because Hootie wouldn't have been happy if he had heard that, I don't think. But I just sat down and did it. And I enjoyed a lot of that process because a lot of our content creators are just so energetic and fun. So that was a crazy couple of weeks, but so much fun putting that project together and just thinking of how everyone was going to perceive it. The video went down really, really quite well. It was, that was a good project.
I was gonna say, you did fantastic work on that again. That's all your videos have been.
Thanks.
That was especially good. And also, I'll shout out Hootie too, because I've done some collaborating with him, working on some of these stuff. Because I put together a little thing for this league as well. I put some little regional infographics, and
that's right.
You actually had like 10 infographics, one for each region, and a bit of a relics overview. And I did a slightly similar thing to you, which is like, oh, this will be really easy. I'll just like slap down a quick thing for each region, and then that's good to go. Not a problem. It's like, oh, actually, a bit lengthier going through that, because I tried to be meticulous as well, make sure we weren't missing out any like important features of each region, and going back and cross-referencing what's being disabled, what's allowed, what's auto-completed, what's not, what's included, what isn't. It's like, oh god, and then we've got to fit a standardized size of infographics. Like, oh god, how much text can I put in? It's like, it's crazy. Again, it's like a lot of the infographics I've done, you probably wouldn't. They don't look, again, they're nowhere near as like exciting or fun to like watch like your videos are, but it's difficult to articulate how like challenging it can be sometimes, just like laboring over like how long a sentence should be, because you need to fit it in a certain size, and I can't really easily change the font because I'm using a lot of the RuneScape fonts, and they mess up really nastily when you start messing with font sizes, and it's like trivial things that no one thinks about, but it's like, oh, it's so like labor intensive weirdly enough for such a minor thing. But I'm glad that I quite like how those ones turned out. I'm actually used the fantastic like base pixel art that mod West did as well for some of the regions that he did for the original Trailblazer League too. So I was able to lean on some of that, and then just did a few little edits and additions for myself to like fill out some final things that weren't fully represented there, like the little Stranglewood and whatnot, and I think some of the islands, like maybe Temperos or something like that. But yeah, that was again, that was a bit of a all coming together slightly last minute. Took a bit longer than I was hoping for, expecting, but hopefully it turned out okay in the end. But yeah, at least the league itself.
Yeah, no, I think they were great. Yeah, no, and I totally understand, the prospect of breaking down a large amount of information into a really small space or into a really short video clip or whatever. I think both of us had to do quite a bit of that for sailing, and for this league as well. I don't find that such a problem when I'm making the video. By the time I've written my script, it's usually about 10 minutes long, and I usually have said, not everything, but everything I felt I needed to say. When it comes to the shorts, though, oh my goodness, I hate shorts so much because I am like inherently a long speaking man. I like to take my time with my writing, and shorts, you have to strip away so much context, so much detail. Half the time it feels like I'm lying to the audience just because it feels like there's other important things I have to say to qualify the statement that I'm making, or to make it very precise and clear what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah.
And I imagine with an infographic, that's just the same case, where it's like you have a certain limit on how much text physically, because not a lot of text will fit on that page, but also in terms of people's capacity to read all that. Most people are going to take a quick glance, right? They'll look for the highlighted words and that's it. And so you have to pick and choose so carefully what you say, when you say, and how long you take to say it.
Oh god, yeah, absolutely. And again, with like some of my bits put together, where labeling them as like infographics, it's like information but also graphics, and that's where the balance between the two, I've definitely gotten that ratio wrong on multiple occasions, where it's like it's sometimes really difficult to like get enough visuals in, but then to have the visuals take a nice pride of place, you just have to sacrifice basically all the information in order to have that be visual. And then it's like, that's defeated the purpose, because now it's not actually saying anything. But then if you want to get all the information down, I can't put in visuals. And then again, just like definitely again with the sailing, that's where I don't know, I won't say I messed up a bit, but I definitely spent a lot of time like sifting through the very big, thick, heavy going dev blogs that we were given in the documents, trying to like pick out all the bits, and then realizing, oh god, okay, like I've barely got the outline of how is this going to finally fit. Now I've got to actually fit like visuals in there as well. It's like, oh Christ. Like it's challenging getting that balance right. But yeah, again, like it seems silly from like a surface level, like taking a step back. It's like, oh, just some pokey little, as you say, marketing material, something someone glances at for a few seconds, probably, at least my stuff is, like the infographics, and then move on from forever. It's like, man, that like I laboured over that for hours. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and at the end of the day, you're under pressure to be able to perform well and to be able to make that information digestible. And that puts a fair amount of pressure on you to get things perfect, because any little phrase that's taken out of context and sent it around social media can ruin a project, right? It's so,
Yeah, yeah.
especially with something as contentious as sailing, people are just waiting. They're just waiting for you to say something slightly awkwardly that they can take and parade around as the reason that sailing is the worst skill in the universe, right? And so fingers crossed, it seems like for the most part, I think we communicated things fairly well. But, there's always that risk hanging over your head while you're in the midst of the project.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, I suppose unless you had anything else to say for leagues, maybe we should talk a bit about the Winter Summit.
Yeah, can do. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah, so one thing that they opened up about there was a little bit more about the enhanced client that they're offering, as well as HD. And we all saw that trailer, I think. What was your reaction to seeing all that?
I guess for me, it's a bit of a mixture, I suppose. I'm very, very happy that as a team, like they're at a point now where they can actually start offering like proper, meaningful updates to their own client and their own base infrastructure and their own like HD options and stuff like that. I think that's fantastic. It's like, I guess it's like the little twinge of sadness where it's just the reality of things where it is a shame it took, such a long time to get to this point. Essentially,
Yeah.
they're kind of, they're playing a lot of catch up with what other players have been doing in the community for the past decade, pretty much, when it comes to like client stuff anyway. So, well, yeah, it's super like big 2 thumbs up from me to see like, yeah, keep plugging on, keep plowing on with their own iterations of things. And I think some of the stuff they're doing, like the HD stuff, was really did look nice. I think they're in a tough spot to try and like retain the proper aesthetic quality in the art style of old school, which in and of itself is already a contentious talking point for a lot of people, and there's not complete unanimous agreement on that one. Yeah, I think it looks like they're doing it pretty respectfully, and I like that. Also, just on a personal level, I want to give massive props to the art team, because I think they have been absolutely smashing it for like, especially the last couple of years. I know they've had like ups and downs, and different projects have turned out better than others, and lots of talking points on how things look, but I really do think they've hit such a nice kind of stride, and I think there is a distinctly old school style now that they've hit, and it feels pretty consistent, and they're hitting it a lot now. And yeah, I genuinely really like the look of pretty much everything they're putting into the game, and as I say, in like the last few years. And on a personal level, not to like undermine or talk bad about all these things that they're doing with like HD and client stuff, but for me, like I love that look. I love that base look. So I don't really play with like graphical plugins or anything like that. So in the grand scheme of things, their own official HD stuff is not super compelling to me, because in all honesty, I probably wouldn't care to use it that much if it's always going to be optional, which hopefully it will be. I really like the base look of the game, other than a few little graphical embellishments here and there, maybe a cheeky weather system squeezed in at some points. But yeah, other than that, I do like just playing with the kind of base game visuals as it is. And again, on the client front, it's difficult to give up RuneLite though, isn't it? For like any other circumstances, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's going to be quite a tall order, I think, to get myself clawing my hands away from the player plugin hub and all the creative and weird things that exist in that. And just I've not spent a huge amount of time in their current like new official client, so maybe you're better positioned to speak a bit more on that. But yeah, like even just the brief interactions I've had, there's some little things where it's like, even just the basic functions I've got, they feel a bit different to how it does in RuneLite, and maybe not nice different. And then just that's before you even get to the plethora of, I don't want to live without my plugins anymore. Have I become a blooming baby? Am I addicted? Or do I need my big flashing boxes over everything now to play the game? I hope not, but at the same time, I do like having all those things available to me. I like having all the option to like tinker with things and toggle things on and off at will, and change things in weird and wonderful ways that can improve either gameplay experience, or actually, for more often than not for me these days, it is just things that relate to like out of game stuff. I find it quite nice having plugins that, like, again, your creator kit is like amazing, right? For like just doing things that are not necessarily related to core gameplay, but just fun ways of experiencing the game that could be useful for like personal projects or whatever. So yeah, it's gonna be really interesting seeing how their client develops and their infrastructure goes and what they do with their full HD stuff. But as I say, I don't know whether you've got like deeper thoughts on where you think they're at the minute, or where you'd like to see them go.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I have so many thoughts about clients in general. first, just to talk about what they showed at the summit, I think it looks really amazing. I think it looks incredible what they've managed to pull off
Yeah.
with their HD mode. And like, look at the volumetric fog and the skyboxes. Oh, real skyboxes. That's just gorgeous. I'm very much with you, though, in that I don't really play with any graphical mods. I don't play with 117 or HDOS. I don't even really like my 3D weather plugin, to be honest.
Oh, it's good.
It's, there's a lot of people who do, but I don't know. It's maybe it has to do with being the one who made it. I can see the flaws in its design, and that bothers me. But yeah, it's as well as its work. It is work to maintain that sometimes, and every once in a while, I break away from the fun of developing Creators Kit and walk back to 3D weather. I'm like, okay, what problem arose now that I had to fix?
No.
It's so maybe that's tainted my perception as well. But I do appreciate that people do enjoy it. I'm really happy. I think people really have gotten to love the rain and storm sounds, especially those are definitely the standouts.
Yeah, I love that atmospheric kind of stuff. Anything rainy is always very cozy to me.
Yeah. As for the client itself, as I said, I started an Iron a couple months back, played it for a couple months straight, went really hard, really enjoyed playing the Iron. Oh my goodness. When I maxed a couple years ago, I think 3 years ago now, I didn't stop playing because I didn't want to play anymore. I stopped playing because I was like, I got to do something else with this little life here. I've got I've got things I got to aim for. I got to do more stuff that makes me feel more fulfilled, I suppose.
Oh, what realization to come to.
Yeah, and so I use the same thing with the Iron. Is when I had finished my couple months sprint, it was like, okay, I'm enjoying this too much. Maybe it's time to take a step back and make sure I get all my priorities right about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. But for the most time when playing the Iron, I used the new client, which has gone under many different names: the Steam client, the new official client, the enhanced client. All these are valid and relate to the same client, which is the new one that Jagex has been making. So I used it for a good couple months, and I found it all right. Yeah, it's a pretty tame response, to be honest. It was pretty all right. In general, I don't use a lot of gameplay affecting features of RuneLite. Maybe I'll talk a bit about that later, about how... No, maybe I'll talk about that later. But I don't use a lot of gameplay enhancing features of RuneLite. And so for the enhanced client sufficed for most purposes that I needed it for, except for the odd quality of life. Like the fact that there's no skybox, or the skybox is just black, or there's no fog at the limits of your render distance. That was actually the one thing that made me download RuneLite initially, was they added a colored skybox, and I was like, I need to play in that world.
Yeah.
And then there's a GPU plugin too, which is of course just incredible. At least compared to the old official client. So yeah, those were the things that pulled me to RuneLite, and so missing that from the enhanced client, that was a little shocking, a little disappointing. It's the classic Black Void, straight out of 2007. So yeah, that was a big thing. Not being able to enter your bank PIN by keys, that was a thing. The clunkiness of the client, oh my goodness, it does not feel smooth to use the UI elements, including the sidebar of the new enhanced client.
That's the big thing I noticed in my admittedly very brief stint using it. Like it, just like the first time I both clicked to expand it, my client kind of did a weird sort of jolting around a bit. I was like, oh, that was odd. Sort of like re-rendered and moved and stuff. I was like, that's not what RuneLite does. And then clicking on the first like side panel thing to like tweak a setting, and it was like, boom, full page pop up. I was like, that's also not a nice thing. RuneLite keeping its settings nice and neat in the side panel, never obstructing gameplay. I feel like that's such an important feature. Like, I cannot stress how
essential.
Important. Exactly, I really do think that is like a make or break thing. So if future plugins in the enhanced official client end up getting integrated with the old setting system and just pop up in front of your gameplay, that's a pretty big downgrade, I've got to say. hopefully that's something they
Absolutely.
can maybe rectify with like feedback changes in the future, because I know it's obviously a big ongoing project and they're constantly adding and changing things, so hopefully they can
Yeah.
make some bigger sweeping changes to stuff like that and from a usability front.
Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah, it makes you realize how many RuneLite functions you use that are isolated to the side panel that allow you to keep playing the game at the same time.
Yes, yeah.
And it's even worse that there's some interactions with the enhanced client that actually interrupt your gameplay. There's in the sidebar and I think the ground items plugin that they have there, you can switch one of the drop down menus and it'll stop you fletching or stop you cooking. And it's like, why is this server side? Who made this?
Yeah.
Why are you making me suffer? Or when I open the interface to set new level goals or new experience goals, it opens up the old interface that you find underneath like the XP button,
Okay.
your little XP tracker that that comes with the default client.
Yeah.
It'll open up that interface that just covers the center of your screen,
Hmm.
or anything that opens up the settings interface. Settings interface is a very big interface that covers the entire center of your screen. And it's just like, yeah, why is this so frustrating to use? I really wish that as many interfaces as possible were shoved into this new sidebar.
Oh,
And the
yes, please.
sidebar was, yeah, disconnected from the server, all client side. That would just, yeah, that would make a world of difference in using this client.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. In terms of like where they're at though, it first off, they did announce that they would be doing a plugin hub during the summit, which is something that like there was no way around it really. I don't know if their goal is really to compete with RuneLite. In fact, Sarnia is kind of I watched a Sebe cast with him and Mod Sarni, which just released this past week. And Sarni pretty much seems to confirm, like, yeah, we know that RuneLite's ahead and it's going to keep staying ahead. We just want to make a good base client. So that's a really interesting perspective to me, because a lot of people are
Yeah.
suspecting that the goal of the enhanced client is to eventually remove RuneLite. And yeah, it doesn't seem to be the case, at least from what they've been saying and how they've approached this topic. I
Well,
think.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, no, I think that if that is like the case, I think that would be the right decision to make. Like, I think it would be
Absolutely.
problematic to try and put a discontinuation date on RuneLite and third-party clients, right? To try and force people into using their ecosystem, regardless of what the state of it is in. I think that would be a bigger mistake at this point in time. Maybe they could have got away with that 5, 6 something years ago, when it was like, well, actually it probably would have been longer than that, like before RuneLite was even a thing, like earlier older clients when they were less formed. They probably could have like thrown their weight around a bit more, because I mean, hey, the elephant in the room for this conversation is they've already spoken about clients and HD options twice before, once trying to shut down clients and once trying to shut down HD, and they both went spectacularly badly. Like, oh boy, did they go badly. So hopefully there's a lot of learnings that are taken from that, and it appears, at least, outwardly, that is the case. And I would like to think that I mean, in principle, I think it's better for all of us, especially us as players. And I mean, dare I sound very pretentious and get on my soapbox now, but like as consumers, as paying customers, I think it's better for us to have the existence of third-party clients alongside theirs, because I feel like that's a nice sort of almost a competitive force, kind of keeping certain things in check. And in many ways, I think you could make a compelling argument for the whole existence of the current official like enhanced client from Jagex, and their ability to do a HD version of their own, and these potential plans for their own plugin API and player plugin hub type thing. I don't think it's outlandish to say I don't think they would have done any of that if it hadn't have been third-party clients and players already doing it beforehand, kind of forcing their hand, as it were.
Absolutely not.
So the very fact that these community initiatives has made Jagex have to make their product better for us, to me, that's just like, that's such a good thing. We as players are the ones who win in that situation. So for as long as we can keep that ecosystem, I think we should be genuinely, not to sound again all like getting pitchforks and torches going, but like I think we should be like kind of fighting for that as a player base, like trying to keep the ability to always have third-party clients a thing, even with the drawbacks that comes with them, because I do think the net benefits are much greater to us as players, even if they're not necessarily net benefits to Jagex in all the ways. But yeah, I think that's kind of my view on that at the minute, I think.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. In order for them to keep improving, you kind of had to push them. And I wish you could just ask them to improve and they would. But that's not how businesses work.
Yeah.
It just isn't that way. And yeah, I like the idea of players maintaining some degree of control over their game and being able to experiment with the stuff that they're given and be able to make a better experience as a result of it. I mean, RuneLite right now is a testament to that idea. Players taking control and deciding that, hey, we want this quality of life, and therefore we will have it. And, Jagex not being the sole determinant of that. Of course, Jagex in general is pretty good at listening to players, but a lot of requests just get tossed by the wayside. Or, it might only affect a couple thousand players, and therefore it's not worth Jagex investigating. But you get one passionate developer, and you get something like, well, I suppose like Creators Kit.
Yeah,
it only has a couple thousand users. But those are mostly just content creators who are making content that is now spreading to hundreds of thousands of other players, which is awesome. And you would have never seen that if we went down the timeline of Jagex having a monopoly on clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I definitely, and again, JMods have outright said, like, RuneLite's the best experience. We all use it. I think it's pretty strongly entrenched. And I think when we have, especially with the context of them originally trying to take away RuneLite, them originally trying to take away 117, when we have that context of the players speaking out rather violently about keeping the things that they have, I don't think that situation is going to change. And I don't think anyone's really looking to change it.
No, hopefully not. I think that would be, as I say, for the best, certainly for us as players at least, and making the best possible game and version of old school RuneScape as a product to us as consumers. I think that's definitely what we should, as I say, be striving for and kind of demanding in our usual old school pushy community ways that we do.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll be honest, I look forward to the future of the enhanced client. I think them
absolutely.
deciding to choose like a different development path from RuneLite is generally a good idea. I don't think they're ever going to match RuneLite's level of customization and the incredible array of features that it offers, but they can offer unique experiences of their own, like their HD, which are going to appeal to a lot of people. It's not going to appeal to the people who've been here for, 5, 10, 20 years, but it's going to appeal to a lot of new players, and that could be really, really good for the game. As well as their plugin hub. I really look forward to all of that. I hope to do some development in it someday myself. I think it's got a lot of potential with the number of features that Jagex can open up to their own client because they have control over it. I don't think it'll ever quite reach the experimental state that RuneLite is in right now, because RuneLite, it's kind of like all bars are off. What do you call it? All chains are off. All guards are off.
I get what you mean. Yeah, I can't remember the word.
You get what I mean. And that allows for an incredible amount of innovation. And I think Jagex will always be slower and more conservative in the changes they make to their client. That'll never allow that degree of innovation. But I look forward to what they can offer. And I think they do have a fair amount waiting in store for us still.
Yeah. There's always that kind of like, I guess, almost liability side of it as well, isn't it? With like Jagex curating an official product, there's probably an expectation and a legal requirement maybe even for it to function and form in a certain way, whereas maybe RuneLite can skirt the line of that a bit, being not officially by Jagex, so there are things you can maybe more conveniently or easily get away with that, basically things that would cause a bit of a hold up or a bureaucratic process that would have to go through to get into like official client stuff, right? So I can totally see that be a thing. And again, but as you say, I echo the excitement of like, if we can start seeing something come through the official client, like a plugin hub type thing that showcases what can be done in that like official enhanced client that can't be done in RuneLite, and it's really quite compelling and interesting. It's like, oh, like there's a type of thing that, because of the deeper level of interaction they can have with certain systems there, that makes a new kind of plugin. I'm not nowhere near knowledgeable or intelligent enough to even understand or hypothesize what that would look like, but hopefully one day we can start seeing stuff like that emerge, and then it's it's just a more compelling and competitive market when people have multiple interesting, unique options to pick from, and both of them have like merits and reasons to exist.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point you make that there are restrictions on what they can do in comparison to RuneLite. Like there's legal restrictions, and there's restrictions from the Apple and Android stores that they had to follow that RuneLite
Yeah.
doesn't. So there's a lot of barriers that way. But at the end of the day, I think the reason they're making the client is because RuneLite is a risk. I think because if anything were to happen to RuneLite or to its development team, whether they disappeared for a while, got tired of developing, went rogue, which would be quite crazy if they did.
Well, yeah.
What do people have to fall back to? And that's the question I think they've been grappling with, and they've been unhappy with the answer of our business dies. So it makes 100% sense that they are working on their own client. And as much as I wish that everyone would, gather in a nice little circle and work towards the same project and, stack our development resources, that's just not the way the world works, unfortunately.
No, that's it.
Yeah. Anyways, probably move on a little bit to something that that you're not going to be able to talk about a lot, to be fair, because we're going to be talking about Varlamore.
Oh, yes. There's a big one, or maybe not, or yeah, it depends. We'll see, I guess.
Yeah. So I think maybe not most people know, but it is a public fact that you went to visit Jagex for a little bit to have a little chat about Varlamore, parts 1, probably part 2 and part 3. How was that experience?
Yeah, that was a really exciting and fun and fascinating one all around. Like, I guess to give a bit of context to all of this, to give a lot of context, a very long time ago, feels like a lifetime ago now, I drew a little old map about 8 years back and included a big old, it was a reimagining of a landmass that had come out at the time, Zaya, back in 2016. Because there were a lot of criticism given to that, and I feel like this is probably going over already trodden ground. Most people who are going to be listening to this will most likely know the story, so cut to the chase. As a part of fleshing out that map, I sort of included some extra areas in it as well. One big notable creation, I kind of included some extra kingdoms, and a big kingdom called the Kingdom of Varlamore on this landmass. So I just sort of coined some of that, didn't really think much of it, meant to just sort of showcase a lot of stuff, and then there you go, put it to one side. As things happen behind the scenes, parts of Kurend were updated and improved over the years, and then bits and pieces of Varlamore suddenly kind of started becoming canon and included. So it's like, oh, okay, this is a thing now, or at least one day it will be. Fast forward even more years, and now we get to pretty much present day, or the past year, and Jagex basically just reached out to me earlier last year. It was actually just in the midst of the sailing infographic project, so I'd already been communicating with them.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so I'd already agreed to do that, and I think I maybe was one down or something like that, or starting the second one or something. I was like, hey, would you be interested in doing a project about Varlamore? And they just straight up said, at the time, actually, no, I think they first said it would be for an upcoming reveal at the summit or something like that. Anyway, the introductory question was a bit more cryptic. And then finding out, okay, they were interested in me collaborating with them to actually concept a full-blown kind of final draft, as it were, of Varlamore for a big area expansion. So I was like, whoa, holy moly. I was not expecting that. Of course, it's in the moment, I'm just yes, I will do that. No, that's it. No further questions. Thank you. But obviously that also meant a number of things at the time. As I mentioned, unfortunately for me, I'd already agreed to do all the sailing stuff, so I'd already started that. And now suddenly I had this going on. So this was last summer now. And yeah, that was a challenge, to put it lightly, because the sailing stuff had already been a little bit heavy going, but it just started to become okay, we're going to space these out a little bit more between each one. So I was like, phew, okay, that's good. And then immediately it was okay, now I'm going to try and concept a whole region. And yeah, there's that was a big one. Again, this is where I don't know to quite what extent I can fully talk about everything, all the starting points, but obviously I was collaborating with the old school team. They had a basic rough vision of what they wanted and rough shape and outline of things and positioning of stuff. So it's like, hey, here's like the very approximate kind of squint blurry picture. You can kind of make out what we're aiming for here, and we want you to kind of just go nuts, do like a proper, what I was sort of somewhat known for, which is making those fake old school RuneScape style maps, like the in-game map stuff, and just do a concept map that is just Varlamore. And so I was like, okay, took it on. It was definitely the single most challenging thing I think I've ever done in terms of like, I knew how much it meant both like to me and just to the game. That was like that's a huge deal. At least
it was such a complex map, such a large area too. I can't even imagine how much work it was, because I haven't done much mapping. I've done a reworked Arceus and the very small bits besides that, and that was a ton of work, and it was a very small area. So having to do the entirety of Varlamore in such gorgeous detail too, I have to say, like, it is a genuinely beautiful map. That must have been so much work on top of already doing sailing at the same time.
It was very, very, very time consuming. Yes, I'll happily have that on the record. It was a big undertaking, and as I say, like I'd never done a map of that scale before, certainly not in like one reasonably compact kind of time period, right? Because as I mentioned earlier with like infographics making, and the difference between doing something as like a hobby versus doing something technically in like a professional capacity, or at least for a professional company, right? Like this is something that is actually going to mean something. It's like, oh god, there's a whole different set of feelings and expectations and things you've got to consider then. It certainly illuminated a lot more about like how I approach map stuff in general and how I want to like design and things, and my sort of instincts and stuff. And I also can't help but look at things in all the areas where it's like, I wish I could have done that differently now, or this doesn't quite sit right with me anymore. But I don't know, I'm the biggest stickler for my own stuff, and I think a lot of people tend to be anyway. But it was rough. So like that one, kind of breaking it down into its like constituent parts and whatnot. Like going into it, obviously, Varlamore already had big batch 1 release. There's been an announcement of all the kind of batch 2 stuff, and so players can already kind of see this batched off release schedule and structure for it and how it's coming into the game. And that was something I knew ahead of time as well. They sort of spoke to me about that and said like, hey, this is gonna be like the batch 1 stuff with like Savannah and Civitas, and so naturally like that was the most fleshed out area, so I had quite a good sense of what's going there and how they wanted it. They had a much kind of clearer vision, being much closer to the thing they wanted to release first. But then everything sort of drifting outwards was then more and more creative freedom started coming into the mix, and it was like, oh, that's where things actually for me got more and more challenging. As it turns out, I think I quite like having some grounding points to be able to like focus on and then mold things around. And then again, with a map of that size and scale, it really did dawn on me. It's like, oh man, it sounds a bit silly to say, but I guess in my like kind of, again, like working life and things I do in general, it doesn't quite I don't quite have areas that fall into this category where it's like almost feel like a case of like writer's block hitting, where I don't usually get that with like creative projects, but this was such a big one. I was like, oh man, I'm struggling here to sort of like keep going and pushing through and knowing like how things should be looking, what I should be adding here, is this looking right anymore? And then you realize you're staring at something for such a long time. It's like, oh god, I need a moment away from this to be able to like regain my composure and like fresh pair of eyes at it. But anyway,
and I guess it's not something that you can just put to the side like a hobby and come back to when you have fresher ideas.
That's it.
There's a deadline. You have to force that creation out of your brain.
Yeah, the biggest pause as well, unfortunately, were not even so much pauses, because I had to like physically put it down for big chunks of time to go back to do another sailing set of infographics. So I was going back through like design documents, putting together those infographics for like X number of days, however long it took me, and then coming back after that. So that was sort of my only way of getting a bit of a breather on it, was sort of working through it, which maybe didn't actually help in hindsight. Again, I will probably admit, if the tables had turned and if I had been presented with the map project by Jagex first and started it and then been offered the sailing stuff, I think maybe I would have turned down the sailing stuff so I could just concentrate on the map. Because I think for me that was definitely the thing there. It's like, this is my jam. This is what I like, truly like this. I really enjoy this, even if it is really, really difficult and it's a lot of challenges and stresses that are coming with it. Like I would say I genuinely like the design aspect of that, whereas the infographic stuff is just a bit more heavy going and sadly falls into the territory of being a bit, there's some more laborious qualities of just putting those together.
It's work.
Exactly.
It's a job.
Yeah, it doesn't quite feel as creatively stimulating in many ways, and there's just a lot of documentation and editing of text, and that's not my super favorite thing. Whereas a map is like practically no text at all, until like the very end, where it's like adding some place names in. That's about the extent of some text. Don't know whether I should admit this or not, but I included a few like place names and things in that very, very last minute, like right before submitting things. I was like, I should probably flesh out some names here. I was kind of thinking they'd be placeholder. Some of them are not placeholder. So,
oh no, maybe I better cut that part of this ramble out.
I don't know. I think it's okay. I mean, I've spoken in the past about how some of the original like Varlamore names come about, and my naming conventions are like a bit all over the place. I'll admit, even Varlamore was like.
Can I give a little complaint? Yeah, I know what you're about to say. Varlamore is because the more part is because you're trying to finish the word off. You had Varla in your mind, and you wanted something a little more, so you added more. now my complaint is now I see it everywhere. I see that, and it's always in caps too.
Oh, no.
And oh my goodness, I don't know why. It just gets to that part of my brain. It's like, I reject this. This is not good.
That's more than fair enough. Honestly, I fully accept that. It's like a cop-out. I genuinely, I think I struggle with that, though, like figuring out a good naming system and stuff, and like, oh man, even like the Savannah, because I named like the Avium Savannah ages ago. And I think technically, like, that was me looking at like Latin-rooted things, because it was next to like Civitas, which again was already a name that Jagex, or like a former J-mod, originally coming up with Zaya, had come up with, and Civitas Illa Fortis was like their creation. Right. So I was like, okay, they're going with like Latin-themed stuff, so I'll do something kind of adjacent to that. And I remember at some point, this was like 8 years ago now, going through like some Latin generic translation-y Google whatever language stuff and like typing in things. And I think it was stuff to do with like, desolate wastelands or regions or unpathed I don't know, something that was a bit, abstract or whimsical sounding. And I think I found something like avium with a few different accents and different things over the letters that meant that I was like, okay, cool, copy paste, done. But then I just removed like the accents and bits, so it was just like avium. But I think avium, just without any of those things, just straight up means like birds. So I'm pretty sure like avium savannah is like bird savannah.
Bird savannah. That sounds fine to me.
But I mean, you know what? Why not? It's got Quetzals now flying around, so it's like they retconned that in fine. I think that works
there
now.
You go.
But yeah, it wasn't my intention necessarily. But again, that's like mine's a bit of a flip of the coin for me as to like when some naming things come out, where the schemes come from, and some of them I tried to think about solidly, and other ones maybe not so much. But anyway, Varlamore has a few interesting names that I've now inadvertently ended up also naming, which I didn't anticipate.
Yeah, it must be strange accidentally canonizing a bunch of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So so from your original concept art and going to see, I think the initial 3D versions, the real versions.
Yes.
How did you feel about that interpretation?
Yeah, so that's what like brings us around to your, I guess, initial opening question of like visiting Jagex and getting involved there. So that was sort of the first time I got to see it in action. That was like at the maybe very start of this year, perhaps, I think. That's like, again, it's like it's a mixture of emotions for me, because it's like it's quite surreal seeing something, especially like a 2D bird's eye view creation suddenly brought to life, because there's quite a limited number of things you can really convey through that two-dimensional image, and there's a lot of creative liberties I even took, where it's like I'm at a point where I don't know how I'm visualizing this part of the map in 3D, but that's not going to be my job anyway, so the old school team can figure that out. So I'll just pass the buck, very unhelpfully, that they're probably not appreciative of. So yeah, that's I mean, on that topic anyway, it's worth pointing out, like, again, doubly props to the old school art team. I'll always give them props for what they do, and they've been smashing it. And I think so much of how they've managed to like extract what I put out in that concept and bring it to life in 3 dimensions was really, really expertly done. I really do like their pretty much everything they've got together with the style and the aesthetic of that region. I think some of the techniques have tried and a few different things as well, and just little things like, trees have been like a weird topic and talking point over the years like graphics of them. And I do quite like the fact that they've managed to go back to like a halfway point between some old style trees with old tree textures on new types of trees in the savannah. And to me, that sort of helped give certain areas a bit of an almost not quite nostalgic feel, but they feel quite
familiar,
exactly,
immersive.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
So I do quite like some of the things they went with that, and just overall seeing that in 3 dimensions, I think was quite it was gratifying. It was very, very surreal still. Again, it doesn't really feel like I did any of like the actual hard work, because I didn't, I guess. Like I was just concepting at the start, and that's it. The real hard work was the old school team at the end of the day, so I don't want to take any credit away from them. But yeah, that's just, I think my big, even still right now, my fears are like just knowing that I've been such an opinionated bastard over the years on like map stuff and like that region, right? Like just knowing going into that was so like a big looming cloud on top of me during the whole thing, where it's like, if I do mess this up and the concept is awful, I won't be able to show my face in the community. Like that's just it. I'm done. Right? I have no excuses anymore. So that's like, that was such a worry for me. I'd like to, again, I don't think I can be the one to judge my own stuff. I have to leave that to other people, but I hope I hit a sweet spot where it didn't make like the same big, broad potential mistakes that like original Kurend and Zaya did. I know there's always discussions about like sizing of things and spacing of stuff and how stuff feels and looks.
I have some nitpicks of my own.
I'm sure. I'd genuinely love to hear that. Hear what you say, but it's like, there's so many challenging elements to me in terms of how putting certain things together. And even as I was doing it, I was worried about, is this thing like too big now? Is that too small? So, well, this thing has to be this size to house this piece of content, and this has got to be over here for this reason, that or the other. And there's just a lot of things juggling there. But I mean, I'm now you've said that, I'm very curious. What's your critique? Go on, lay it down. Let's hear it.
Well. First, I think it's only appropriate to say that it is a fantastic region. Like it's really like, especially considering where we were, how many years ago? 8 years ago?
Yeah. Great.
It is incredible the amount that we as a community and as a development team have kind of evolved our perspective, been able to better pinpoint where our weak spots are and work around those, and to better understand the game that we've been playing for so long. I think that's one thing that was really hard to work back from in 2013, is that everyone had kind of forgotten what 2007 was in some ways. And I think that really spoke out in 2016 with Kurend's release, where we had such a difficult time saying exactly why we didn't like this thing. In fact, I think I liked it to start, I think, until I saw your map. I was coping pretty hard, to be fair. But as soon as I saw your map and your criticisms way back when, I was like, oh, that's why it's bad. It's just we hadn't developed the language at that time to be able to talk about the mistakes we were making, to be able to fix the mistakes we were making. And so seeing this right now, it's such a world of difference. I'm very happy. And as you've said, I'm pretty pleased with 90% of the production of the art team these days. I'm now, admittedly, I am probably one of the greatest sticklers for old school art in this community.
Yeah.
I tend to get very nitpicky about things, and a philosophy I believe in, which isn't the same across everyone else when it comes to old school art, is the idea of consistency. It's that you can make an art style as good or bad as you want it to be, but so long as it's consistent, you can get immersed in it.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that goes anywhere from the most gorgeous, realistic-looking games in the world. Like you look at some of the newer games that come out these days. I suppose Red Dead Redemption 2 is not that new, but it still looks gorgeous and is very consistent and very beautiful.
Yeah.
And then you go to the polar extreme, where, I don't know, have you heard of the game Dwarf Fortress?
I have done, yeah. I've not actually played it, but I know it was a very old style, hyper minimalist, or at least like the original version was.
The original, yes. They've done a Steam release which has this gorgeous pixel art, which is very beautiful. But the very original version was made using ASCII characters.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, which it's just, it's really hard to jump into that game. And indeed, I haven't really played it. I've really just watched it on YouTube. Um, but you see the people who do play that version of the game and how immersed they get into these literal characters, like letter characters on a screen. And it's kind of like that scene from The Matrix where the guy's like, I don't even see the code anymore. I just see, there's a brunette right there. She's really beautiful, or whatever he says. It's like you can get super immersed in any art style so long as it's consistent. It doesn't mean the art style is going to appeal to you. Dwarf Fortress's original art style doesn't appeal to me. Its Steam release does appeal to me. It's very beautiful. But I think so long as you're consistent in any art style, it can be immersive. And so when I look at the art that's been done over the past 20 years, that's kind of the metric by which I grade it. If it's consistent, then I can believe and be immersed in it, and it works within the world that it contains. If you were to introduce a hyper realistic character into RuneScape, like a character from Call of Duty, it would look so out of place, right?
Yeah.
Have you seen that one guy, August?
Oh,
he's oh my goodness. He is objectively higher quality, like higher fidelity chat head, but it looks so awful because it just does not mesh well. Yeah. And so that's something that I look for in art in this game. And you can even see that the art style developed over time, even back in the day. 2004 was pretty self-consistent because it was all like one release, probably done by all the same artists and the same development team. But like even a year after, you see changes starting to occur. In 2006, they start doing reworks of different areas like Varrock and Falador and characters like demons or cows. You see the art style mold from even more simplistic, even more rudimentary, to these higher fidelity models, often with sort of painted in shadowing instead of like using the lighting system to just shadow things. And you can walk that all the way through to RuneScape 3, where it is what it is now. The same thing for the branch of old school back in 2013. Obviously, it reset to whatever 2007 was, but then it started to branch out in some different areas. And I think especially during that period, like, when they started to introduce new items, 2014 to 2017-ish seemed to be a particularly contentious time because you had a lot of really weird models coming into the game, a lot of really awful looking equipment, and a lot of purple. That was a big thing back then. We didn't like that.
That's true.
And so now in the past, I think especially in the past 6 years, we've done a lot of improvements to understand what it means to be old school in art style. And like we've had a lot of conversations about this in public and private spaces. We've had the artists themselves take a look at the criticisms being made and adapting to it. Well, sometimes adapting to it, maybe sometimes not. I think, one piece that still sticks out to me is I think the dwarf multi-cannon from Shattered Relics League.
Oh,
that one still feels kind of weird to me. Yeah. And, there's the odd pieces here and there like that. And then there's more subtle things. And that's where I think I get to some parts of Varlamore, where I'm like, it works pretty well, but would I have liked something a bit different? Sure. And I think to start again at the parts that I really, really love, the entirety of Avium Savannah and the mountain to the west, whose name I cannot recall. I think those have been, yeah, I think those have been brought to life in incredibly beautiful fashion that really feels old school. Just the way, like, sometimes it's as simple, as you said, as reusing assets to maintain this sense of consistency in the world. That the things you see here are different than what you see elsewhere, but not so different it feels like a different art style. So, some of the plants, some of the rocks, the use of textures again, the use of elevation. I think elevation was done really, really well. If you just angle your camera down and look around the savannah, you see all these bumps and rises and twists and turns. It's really nice to look at.
Yeah.
Same thing, credits to you, the placement of a lot of the water and the shape of the water and the shape of the landmass. Like, it didn't take us extraordinarily long to figure that out. after Karen released that, you know, coastlines should look like coastlines. And that's great that that problem's been resolved. But then I walked to Civitas Illifortis, and there's some things that I'm like, I don't know about this. I don't know how I feel about this. And maybe you can provide me a little extra context or a little extra commentary.
Oh boy, I can try, but
so the one thing that got to me, I think the most was the busyness of the area. It's partly in terms of the number of NPCs. They really cranked up the number of generic NPCs quite a bit for this city. I think partially in just the density of like different pathways weaving around. I was like, I don't know. It's just a lot to take in. And that's what I felt when I initially teleported in. I was like, man, why do I feel overwhelmed? And it was really hard for me to place, besides the feeling that there was maybe a lack of space. And I can understand that can be intentional. I think if you look at a place that's really gross, like now I'm blanking on the name, Bergderot.
Oh yeah, like like Mayaditch area and places like really compacted.
Mayaditch, yeah.
Yeah, Mauritania.
Yeah. I think those places kind of edge quite a bit on that as well. But I think I was expecting to feel a little more spacious in the big city than a place that's like a complete dump like parts of Mauritania are.
Yeah.
I think that's something that got to me.
No,
I think the other thing. Oh, sorry.
No, you keep going. I'll let you continue your thought here.
Okay. I think the other thing was the scale of the walls. I understand how elitist, nitpicky maybe this sounds, but I look at some of the walls from Lumbridge and I put them beside the walls of the city. I'm like, man, I don't know. Do those feel like they exist in the same world? Like, again, it's beautiful art. I think the artists who made this are extraordinarily talented. I just put things side by side with some of the things from before, and I'm like, I don't know. It looks kind of like the same criticism I would have for parts of Prif. It looks like some of the things are a bit oversized for what they should be.
Yeah, no, I think that's all like perfectly valid criticism, quite frankly, across the board there. So, like Civitas is the one. Like for me, definitely going into the design of that. God, how many iterations did I do on that? Like maybe dozens. I don't know. It was like It was a lot. Like that was. I
believe it. Yeah.
Went through so many things. Because I did actually save like quite a lot of in progress, just like basic PNG images of like the current as I was going throughout. So I've maybe got like 30 or 40 work in progress shots that I could probably string together in like a GIF or something. I should maybe do that when
it'd be really
Varlamore's
cool.
all out,
I think,
or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, that could show the movement of stuff. Like I mean, again, I think it's okay to talk about most of this at this point in time. Like, you know, the Colosseum, for example, like that ended up in maybe 6 different spots around like the city and the savannah and all sorts, based on conversations as to like where it should be, how big it should be, what the prominence of it should be, how it should like the focus of it versus everything else. So like, yeah, there was a lot of like considerations and back and forth there and slightly differing opinions on different things going into it. But I agree, like Civitas is the one where I'll admit, I think, I don't know, I think most of it I could have done a better job, but it's one of those things where it's like you can spend an infinite time out of something and probably still see things you can improve. So you got to call it quits at some point.
Yeah.
But like, I totally get you on that, because I was feeling like the size and the spacing issue. So I guess from my kind of perspective, I want to be really careful here, because I definitely don't want to sound dismissive or like I'm passing on any blame, because I want to accept like fault. If there are parts of it that feel kind of crappy from the layout, then that's definitely on me more than anyone else. But at the same time, you know, I was kind of, Civitas was the one thing I was working within a number of like limitations for. So like I knew from the get-go, based on their sort of like outlines of designs, obviously there has to be a Colosseum like somewhere in the region, either in the city, on the outskirts of the city, or adjacent to it or something. And then as it became abundantly clear very quickly in the iterations, like that's got to be a full-blown map square just in and of itself to facilitate the gameplay. So I was like, okay, boom.
Absolutely.
One giant map square down already. So okay, that's already going to make quite a big feel to things. You got the Kothon, I think it is called, like the port, like the big inset port. And that was already like the initial draft I was given, like that was there to begin with. I was like, cool, that's what I'm sort of like dealing with, like a big spacious, you know, area for boats and ships and things. And obviously that also was like inspired by another fantastic community creator out there, good old Zigzag Ziggle, the community map maker, who does amazing maps. They include a really cool Kothon port in their version of Varlamore, and so I think the old school team were like super hyped about that and thought it looked super awesome and wanted to include it as well. So it's like that had to go in too. So it's like, there you go, there's like another big chunk of overlapping multiple map squares. There are a few big features that also had to be a certain size and kind of position. So like I was, starting with the so you've got the museum, you've got the palace area, and then you've got like the military quarters area. And these were things that, again, were like sort of in the lore, and things I had to like double check and research whether everybody had some bits down. It's like, okay, so the palace is like a big thing in the middle, being shadowed by some mountains to the north, and it overlooks both a museum and a military HQ. So it's like, okay, these have got to all be big things. Then getting feedback on some iterations of that as well, it's like, oh, bear in mind, like things like the museum, they've got to be like a certain size and shape, because it's got to be able to house a certain number of exhibits, and if it's going a bit too smaller than what I was already doing, then it's not going to be playable. So I was like, okay, got to make sure that stays a certain size. But anyway, the long story short is, like, as I'm going through, there are a lot of like key features that kind of like had to be one by one in some way, shape or form, that I was then sort of like conforming to and working around and figuring out, okay, what order of everything else makes sense. Like the big walls, as you say, like I'd fully agree. I think you're not wrong that they feel disproportionate compared to the most traditional walls. You could probably hand wave it and try and say like lore reasons and explanations. It's like, oh, well, this reason.
But then it makes Falador looks weak.
Yeah,
right?
I know that.
I think that's the one thing. It's context.
Exactly. That is true. That is very true. But like, yeah, you could try and justify it. But again, it's all a bit, wishy-washy justifications. But like, that was one of those things where I'd had like, again, like in terms of the features given to me on like the initial map included like walls and an aqueduct of like approximate sizes that they are in game. So I was like, okay, I know roughly what they had in mind and what they envisioned for like outer walls and adjoining structures and stuff. So it's like, cool. And again, in terms of like concepting space and stuff, there was also this idea of like an outer fortress. So it's like, this is a city that's grown and grown and grown, and it's grown too big for its own good, so it's had to spill out beyond the city walls. So it's like, okay, got to try and represent that too. And so I think in my mind, at least, it's like, well, okay, the inner city kind of has to look quite like built up, and like there's no longer any developable land for that to make full sense. So I think that's the direction I sort of took with it, making sure all the buildings were like a bit more spacious to just create a bit of that intentional disparity between like the outer fortress area looking much smaller, more hastily put together kind of thing. So it's a bit poorer of a district for those who can't afford to live in a nice lap of luxury inside while getting pickpocketed to death by players. But yeah, poor folks. But yeah, I think that's how that all sort of like comes together. And so like when I take a step back, I think again, I'm not gonna like deny your criticism. I think you are bang on the money. I wouldn't mind seeing an iteration of a Civitas where everything was like a little bit scaled back, a little bit toned down, a little bit more kind of quiet and ambient space. That was why I tried to include the park in it, because I was like, okay, I want something to break this up at least a bit, and I wonder if this can do it. So it sort of, gives the justification why there aren't like yet more buildings and houses in here, but it's like a nice kind of transition-y bit between a more built-up industrial and military side off to the Colosseum in the east and the more inner city stuff, market to the west. But again, I don't think that was necessarily fully successful, as much as I do like the really nice look
busy.
of the park itself.
It's a very busy park.
But yeah, it is a busy park. It's like squeezing a lot into like a small space, in terms of like what's around it as well. So no, I think you're right. I'm just sort of like waffling now, trying to like half justify decisions, but equally fully like respect that viewpoint. I think you are right that it is a bit like it errs on the side of like things being a bit too big, a bit too packed, and a bit too busy. Perhaps a slightly toned down version would have been a bit nicer.
Yeah, no, and I'm definitely don't want to lay all the blame on you. I think a lot of the problems that, if anything, I have with scale is more with like the 3D representation of it. Like if I look at the square footage of the palace or the museum or the guard place, I think that's fine. But some of it just feels so tall. It's kind of like if you took the pyramid from Tombs of Amascut and just threw similar sized buildings. Like, man, these are just so big. The Colosseum, I don't actually know if I feel that's too oversized. I think in terms of like its use of space in the actual Colosseum itself, like in the activity, when actually fighting it, you really just dance around one pillar. So like, there's a lot of dead space, right? But like, if you were to tell me that this Colosseum exists in a world with the Grand Exchange, I'd be like, sure, yeah, no, makes sense. These people obviously care a lot about their entertainment, and the Roman Colosseum wasn't so different in that regard. Yeah, so there's some things like that. Other than that, though, pretty happy with most of the components there. Just some overscaled, too tall buildings or too great walls.
Yeah.
And you know what? I gotta show you this. I gotta get your opinion. How am I best gonna deliver this to you without ruining my recording?
Oh, what?
You know what? Well, because the reason I say that is because if I message you, then the viewer is going to see me messaging you because I'm currently recording Discord.
Oh, right. Okay.
So you know what? We'll just black that out. Or you know what? Even better, I'll put up an image of what I'm looking at exactly.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. So let's just send this to you. All right. So I want you to tell me. Talk to me about the tree on the right there. How do you like it?
I'll be honest with you, that does strike me as odd. I'm not...
It's a little strange, eh?
Yeah, I get what they were going for, but at the same time, it does strike me as odd that it's just the base tree squashed, right? That strikes me as odd.
But, when I jumped in game and I saw the different types of trees, I was like, oh, cool, these are really nice trees. Even the ones that weren't textured, I was like, oh, but it's pretty well detailed. Like there's the similar-ish cone-shaped, I think they call them cypress trees. It's like, it's not textured, but it's pretty highly detailed. I'll give it a pass. But then I saw these, and I was like, oh, I like that. Wait, I don't know if I like that. I was like, why don't I like this? What is it? And I angled myself down. I was like, wait, I know this tree. I've seen this one before. And it turns out they just took the base tree model, squashed it in the X and Y directions, and stretched it in the Z direction.
Yeah.
So everything does appear quite stretched. And this one just inordinately bothered me, while simultaneously found it really funny. As I said before, I think reusing assets is generally fine. They reuse a lot of assets for a lot of the plants of Varlamore, a lot of the grasses. They do a lot of recoloring too, which is, it's fine. It looks good. It's still immersive. It's not immersion breaking. So, reuse assets as you so please. But yeah, this one is like, you guys could have made a new tree that's a little bit taller.
Yeah, I think that's like, because I know the art team were like experimenting and iterating in multiple different ways, like even during the Varlamore Batch 1 project itself, like of different types of trees and how they should look, and doing ones with like, the textureless look that I know has been oft criticized in places like Prif and the Isle of Souls and everywhere. And then other versions where we've got a few in game, as you kind of already highlighted, where there's some with like additional kind of modeling to look like leaves but not textured, which I think is kind of interesting look too. And then obviously somewhere it's just traditional, like reusing the actual tree texture, like the ones actually out in the savannah. Those are the ones I really quite like and how they've sort of looked.
Yeah.
That one, I guess that was just an attempt to rejig an existing tree and just squishing it in on one of its axes. And yeah, I'll agree. I don't think that necessarily looks right or particularly good, if I'm being blunt. Probably would be better with a actual custom, like bespoke made tree that just looked like a slender tree. If I had to hazard a guess, I don't know, I'm being like trying to defend the old school art team now for them. I feel like that's probably a case of like, you got to cut corners at some point, is the tragic reality of like game development, isn't it? And there are things that, saving your time making one more tree by just squishing an existing one, I can get why that might have been a decision. But in hindsight, maybe that would be a nice one for them to go back to and like change, because I agree that's like, it doesn't look good.
A bit much.
Yeah,
it's a little too stretched. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely valid. And again, I think there's realistically, there's no artist in the world who has made better old school graphics than our old school team.
Yeah, sure.
Right? They are extremely talented, and they have to deal with such strong confines that go against probably every principle of modern current day art to be able to make stuff for this game. And so this is definitely one of those cases where, yeah, I think it's, as you say, maybe a bit strapped for time. I figured they could reuse something. I don't think it would be that much work to take the base tree model and modify it in an image modifying program. It'd be pretty simple. I think the fact that no one seems to have complained about these trees, except for me now, speaks to the fact that, well, I guess it probably works, doesn't it? I think if anything, they probably wanted the top of the tree, like the texture, to be like they wanted the leaves of the tree to be stretched out. But I know that they're tooling for actually applying UV mapping to like map textures to the polys.
Yeah,
I know that's in not a good state.
Yeah.
It's
I think it was like barely even
we've
possible at different points in time up until like literally quite recently as well, which is kind of why when they wanted to make new trees, they did resort to like just purely textureless ones. Like it wasn't entirely an artistic decision. It was like a technical one too.
Yeah. So if I had to hazard a guess, that probably has to do with it. That said, they do have those nice is it the trees with like the large thick trunks with like the really wide canopy, the new
One
ones
of
in
them's called
Varlamore.
Stone Pines, I think, and maybe what else is there?
Think of the other one.
There's definitely another one as well, yeah. Oh, I'd have to wiki it quickly.
Yeah. But it's the one they made the textures, they applied the textures to. And I was looking through the cache, and I saw that they had a variant of that looked more like the cypress trees. And I'm just going to confirm I'm talking about the correct trees that I'm talking about. Let's see, cypress tree. Yes, that wasn't textured. They had a variant of that wasn't textured, but had a similar like design to the cypress tree. But I'm glad they went with the textured one. I really am.
No, me too. I think
it looks great. I think it just gels so well with the rest of the world.
Yeah. No, it's everything you've said, right? Like about consistency is king, I think, with a game like Old School, well, just in general. And if you can, even if you can make something that might, like objectively by some artistic measure, look better by some degree in isolation, I think if it does kind of contradict the established conventions, then maybe it's not better for the intended use, right? So that's why I think if we just take a step back and acknowledge, like on the old tree front, I love that we've done another like lengthy tree conversation. This is brilliant. It's like the fact that like 90+% of the game is just good old fashioned basic textured trees with slightly different shapes and canopies and the way the textures are applied, then that probably should be seen as like the gold standard of like that's an old school tree at this point in time. That's how they look.
Yeah.
That's just whether you like it or not, whether you'd prefer the whole game to be 100% textureless. It's kind of beside the point because that's not what the game is. So keeping it consistent probably does make sense. So again, like I'm down for the old school team still trying to like iterate and improve, and to do that you've got to like experiment on occasion. So I totally get and respect like trying different things. But yeah, I think given the mixture of stuff we've seen now over the years, I think I definitely would hope that's the direction they go in, where they can make like unique trees, cool stumps and trunks, and then a nice traditional looking canopy that's maybe some recolored leaves depending on the area or type of tree it's meant to be. I think that probably would be the best
some
direction.
new leaf textures.
Oh yeah,
I'd love to see new leaf textures. That'd be so cool.
That would be cool. Yeah.
Here's maybe another spicy one for me.
Ooh.
The new dwarves.
Oh,
those guys are interesting. They're I looked at them and it took me a little bit. I was like, are those supposed to be dwarves? And again, it's the whole consistency thing. They didn't look like the dwarves that I know. And I'm like, oh man, you put them side by side with our current set of dwarves, and like they look like generic fantasy ones. They don't look like they fit this place. As much as the designs themselves are really quite incredible. Again, very talented artists. I think if I didn't have the context of our current dwarves, I'd be much more accepting of the new ones as sort of the base standard.
Yeah.
But yeah, just side by side, I'm like, wish we didn't do that.
Yeah, no, I get that. Because I see it both sides as well. Again, it's like, just like you say, when we've got those existing set of dwarves already and they look a certain way that's very well established in very old places, it would be nice to keep that consistent. At the same time, I can also understand why they want to try and justify why these look different, both with it being like a new region, but also I guess there's some deeper justification of what these dwarves are or where they originate from or whatever. But then even that gets a bit messy when it's to do with like Imkando dwarves or like Lover King dwarves or what came before, or should something else look different versus them, or should they be changed as well? I don't know. It does get a bit messy there where, again, I think in principle, like in terms of like character design, the whole like elf debacle we've had over the years, which still kind of lingers a bit to this day, they probably would make more sense to always err on the side of caution and not make too many kind of extensive revamps. Obviously that's not like a revamp, so it's not exactly the elf situation at all when it's like a new area with a new group being added, and again you can kind of justify it through certain means why they'd look a bit different. But yeah, I think my gut says you're kind of right. Like looking at them, it's just sort of like that part of your monkey brain that's like been playing the game for 20 years associate a dwarf looking a certain way, and these don't quite look that. They look very close, but like not in some key areas. Like some of them look really cool. I like some of the weird like beard and hair designs of someone like the little hairdresser down there and stuff.
Absolutely,
they look really, really cool, but
really unique designs.
Yeah,
for
fantastic.
Sure.
Like aesthetically speaking.
Yeah. Again, I think like if you were to challenge someone, hey, what if these two dwarves met, this one from Keldagrim and this one from Varlamore? Would you have any problems with this meeting? And I think, I think my answer just had to be like, yeah, no, they feel like they kind of come from two different games.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, I think I gave enough license to the Imkando dwarf for being different. Even though I guess Thurgo set a weird precedent. He's a weird guy, Thurgo.
Isn't he?
But I think, I was all right with letting it slide then, just because it was supposed to be a very different species. But I don't know, when you apply that design more broadly in the face of all the other dwarves, it's like, I don't know. Doesn't make me the happiest. But in the end, it's not the end of the world. It's fine. We're still surviving. We're still having fun playing this game.
Yeah, that's it.
It's still a beautiful area. Yeah. The irony here is that we haven't talked about the content of Varlamore, but
yeah, that's true actually.
which gameplay is supposed to be kind of king in a game, but at the same time, I haven't done like an extraordinary amount. Most of my time these days is spent on working on RuneScape things that are outside RuneScape. But have you engaged with it much? Have you enjoyed it much?
Yeah, like the bits that I've done, I've liked it broadly speaking across the board. Like I love the quests. I mean, there's now an infamous frog quest we have in game where it's like,
oh, so good, so good. I loved that one.
Getting to hear a little bit inside. I don't know if I really say anything on that because that was some conversations I had whilst whilst there at the Jagex offices. But that was funny hearing how that came about. But
I think, I listened to Sarni's cast with Sebe the other day, and I think Sarni had said that like it was very last minute addition. Some people in the team didn't even know it was happening.
Yeah.
It just kind of flew in.
I think that essentially was it. Like that's what I heard. Like it was like, how quickly could you design a quest like right now? It was like, yeah, I'll do this then. And then boom, out pops probably the fan favorite quest of the bunch. So
here I
go ahead.
I had one strong aggressive contention with that quest.
Oh, okay.
Terrible. There was one part in which your character asks the frog, it's like, your frogs that can talk? Like, this is unbelievable, pretty much being the implication. And the frog's like, listen, there's dragons in this world. How can you not believe that a frog can talk? And what do you think about that line of logic?
I feel like that, it kind of, I guess it depends on the order of content that you assume your character has gone through, I feel like. Because the player at that point in time has had potentially plenty of opportunity to have gained the ability to talk to a lot of different species, right?
That's right.
In different contexts and with handy little amulets and all sorts. So in theory, that probably shouldn't be surprising. But again, if we're playing off the logic that can technically be played out of order in terms of like someone could just do, I forget the name of it, like the Varlamore entry quest and then just go straight and do that one, which I think is possible. That could be like the second quest you ever do in game, maybe. I guess in that order, maybe you can justify a statement like that. But even still, it's maybe.
How about
Oh,
this?
go ahead.
A frog random event.
Oh, that's a good counter. That's a really good counter. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah, we've been talking to frogs for
Yeah,
years, haven't we? Oh.
we
Do
have.
they have a human speak amulet on or not? I don't think
Well,
they.
yeah,
Only I think Evil
who
Bob does,
knows?
doesn't he?
Maybe they're all princesses or
Oh,
princes.
there we
Maybe
go.
that's the case for all of them.
Ah,
Could
there we
be.
go now. Now we're getting some deep frog
Yeah.
lore.
Although the other interesting thing about that line of logic is like, I don't know. There's a lot of things. How should I say this? In their world, if it's not established that frogs can talk, then no one would assume frogs can talk. Kind of like if you haven't established that. How would I say it? GentleTractor, do you believe that smartphones are real? Or do you not believe in dragons when smartphones are real? See all those crazy things that smartphones do, and you can't believe in a lizard that breathes fire.
Yeah, that's a good counter. I like that.
Yeah. I think, but that's more like my contention at times with how worlds are portrayed in terms of their consistency.
Yeah.
Now, I know old school has always been kind of pretty flaky with that. Let's be honest. You have characters in this world who will straight up tell you that we are in this crazy simulation, and outside of this game, there are people who are controlling us. And then you have King Arthur over there, who straight up says that he's from good old England, and him and Camelot are going to return there someday. So I think RuneScape being the game that it is, which is just it's part comedy, is what it is.
Yeah.
Pretty goofy and we'll do things for the gag sometimes. I'm a lot more forgiving that way for a game like this. But yeah, if you're gonna try some serious world building, though, you got to make sure you stay within your consistent rules.
I love that this is now officially I think it's got to be the most thoroughly dissected that the ribbiting tale of a lily pad labor dispute will ever have by any players ever. Like, this is it right now. Everyone's like, that frog quest was fun, wasn't it? Yeah.
and here I am.
But the world building, the
moping and depressing
implications.
about the one line. It's like, can you believe how much this broke?
Oh dear. But no, it is good points though.
Yeah.
But I do all serious though. It's nice having like, you are right, but it's also having that good mixture. I think is nice, right? Like I think in recent years there's been a lot of more heavier going, like the deeper, admittedly really fantastic quests still, but have quite a somber and serious tone to them. So I quite like when the game can remember its roots and it is weird and quirky and charming at the same time, and you can just do both. They don't have to be one or the other, and that's a good example of that. And yeah, the game's just a bit of a big old patchwork quilt, and I think it always will be, like slightly different, somewhat opposing forces and features, and doing your best to stitch them all together is a big job.
You have to do some mental gymnastics for sure. And I think context plays a big part of it. I think actually something that you might resonate with, if you remember While Gothic Sleeps back in the day.
Yeah.
I think there's if I recall correctly, that is the quest where you make the truth potion, right?
Maybe.
Or am I thinking a different quest?
Oh, I can't remember. It's been such a long time since
I'm going to say you're interrogating someone, and this is whatever quest it is, it's a very serious quest line.
Yeah.
Okay. You're interrogating someone, but you need to get them to tell the truth. So you concoct this truth potion, and you give it to this old man, who walks over to the guy, but drops the truth concoction on the way, and it breaks and shatters on the ground, and you can't get information from the prisoner that way.
Yeah.
Does this ring any bells?
I can't remember, to be honest with you. I feel like it's like hints of it, but I can't place it for certain now.
You know what? That's all right. I have in my mind, and maybe I'm just fabricating all of this, but I have in my mind the cutscene where this happens, and it's like I think the developers meant it as a gag. It's funny, right?
Yeah.
It's all this work you put into making this potion, all the questing you did, and it just gets dropped by this clumsy old guy. But the players were really upset with that at the time because they felt like their efforts weren't being rewarded in a way. They felt like their time was being wasted. And I think that kind of going back to context and, when humor is appropriate, I think if you have like a more serious quest, you probably want to be more concerned about if you want there to be stakes, you got to make sure there's sort of, consistency to your writing. You're not just making up rules on the fly
Yeah.
or breaking the rules for comedic bits. But if you're writing a comedy quest, a lot more flexible that way. I think you have a little more freedom to do what you want. And as you said, you kind of have to. It's a patchwork, this game.
Yeah.
You have to meld these opposing ideas in your mind into some sort of cohesive whole, or, well, I guess you just go play a different game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, you're right. I think that's all good points. It's like, I don't know. I feel like it brings up in like the wider, not gaming necessarily, but like films, the old like Marvel film quips where they just sort of like stuff them to the brim with like pointlessly breaking up the tension when it doesn't really need to be with just like a horrible one-liner. And it's stuff like that like breaks the flow of an otherwise serious or like impactful moment where it's like you don't have to have like play it for laughs every second, right? It's okay to have let something sit and have an emotional
let it sit. Absolutely. Yeah, no, totally agree that way. Anyways, unless you had anything else to say about Varlamore, do you want to talk about god alignments and maybe touch a bit on Ruinous Powers?
Oh, yeah, can do. I'm happy to jump into that.
Yeah. So I don't know if we'll go directly into Ruinous Powers too much. Honestly, I didn't pay too much attention to them. I figured there's a lot of people who actually PVM who are going to be able to provide a lot more context than I am.
Yeah.
A lot more interesting thoughts than I am. The one thing that I felt by the second iteration or so of the powers was like, this is just a lot. It is a lot to have to account for. Prayers impact every part of the game, and introducing so many at one time is really overwhelming and is going to change so much at one time. Is the game going to be recognizable after it's finished? Do I really want this to go through? Because I was initially all for it. I was like, finally, we're getting a new prayer book that's not curses. We're not just copying and pasting. We're doing something unique and something that's built to fit old school. But by the end of the Ruinous Powers development series, I was really glad that they shuttered it. I don't know. How do you feel?
Yeah, no, I think I'm in much of the same boat to you. I'd like equally say I think we're both very similar in terms of like, we're probably not going to be the ones someone wants to come to talk about like in-depth combat analysis and like top-end PVM expertise necessarily. I think we're going to be more going off on frog-based narrative world-building tangents. So bear that in mind. But no, I'm fully in agreement there. Like I wasn't, like I didn't really spend much time. I logged into one of the betas I think they did for the Ruinous Powers and sort of like basically had a look, and that was like my extent. Like had a look, turned some of them on, clicked on something to attack stuff just to see them. I'll admit, like, yeah, it sounds stupid to say because it is like the old monostalgia criticism where it's like just seeing like a different kind of overhead was like, ooh, that's not protect from melee. It's like, that's weird. It's like just there's an immediate little jarring moment there, but I think that's the kind of stuff that can kind of get over in the long term anyway, because there are new things that get added that change the look and feel of something in the short term and then just feels okay in the long term. But anyway, yeah, it's the, as you say, it's the wider gameplay impact and how meta shifting things would be, and would the game actually feel the same, like on a deeper level going forward. And with the prayers as the way they were implemented, and like just prayer as a skill and how it's structured is like, it's already so well embedded in so much content and structure, like everything is balanced around how it exists right now, that it's so difficult to like unpick that and try and adopt something else into it without just doing what obviously the Ruinous Powers originally did, which was just like overlap pretty much 80 to 90% and then just have like a little hey, here's the 10 to 20% mixing things up a bit, and then inevitably that falls on a razor's edge as well, where it's like, is it on one side where it's a bit underwhelming and it's dead content sticking to the standard prayer book, or is it on the other side and it's actually just objectively better than what we had before? So now it's just, this is what you use, bye old prayer book, just like what happened before, right? Like that was basically the design philosophy that was embraced, I guess, back in the day with pre-EOC to RS3, where it was like, yeah, no, these ancient curses they're just better at this point in time. We just accept that they're now better, and you will swap, and you probably won't ever swap back. No, I think some different bits and pieces and the way certain things were balanced maybe justified it with certain combinations of items and prayers, but anyway, for the most part, it was like a straight up upgrade. And I don't think that definitely doesn't make sense for old school, I think, in terms of how old school progression works. I think you can get away with it with like gear more so, which is a kind of a weird conversation in itself in a way, where it's like, why does something feel okay for gear versus prayers? And I think that's because gear is a lot
Mm-hmm.
more situational in terms of like you're thinking about what thing you're bringing to a certain place, and you're not always going to be bringing that same thing to everywhere in game. Whereas when you're on a prayer book, that's just like there always, potentially everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So that is just more impactful, I think, inherently so.
Universal.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, impacts everything.
Yeah, like that universal system, as you say. So thinking of it in that way, it's like, yeah, that is going to be that is going to instill that feeling, I think, where it's like you got to be more careful about what you change, and why adding something like that does feel different than adding just a new item or anything else. And then yeah, I think them shelving that original one was the right decision as well. Like that felt like it wasn't going to hit a good spot, even though they fully admitted, and I think they were right in saying, like, if we had have put this to a final poll, I think it would have comfortably passed. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have been right for the game still.
Yeah.
So glad that they didn't. Glad they just opted to take the elected decision to just, we're not going to poll this actually now. We're just going to pull it instead. It's kind of just on that topic anyway, very briefly, like that was again, another weird one where some players like to work themselves up into a bit of a hyper frenzy. And I did see a few comments where it's like, why are Jagex trying to like shove this in our mouths? We've already like told them we don't want it, and like we had to like get them to stop it. It's like, well, the feedback helped, but like the players didn't vote no to it. They actually voted overwhelmingly yes to it in the initial concept stages, and they were the ones that took the decision to pull it without polling it, even though they were confident that it would pass. So I don't know, just a little observation anyway, that some players were already like, they like to make Jagex out to be more of a villain than they are at times, I think, and it's a bit ridiculous. You don't need to do that. That doesn't help anyone.
Yeah. No, I definitely resonate with pretty much everything you said there. It was just, I think there's something to say for too much change at once is just too much, even if it's not like meta, completely meta shattering. It's just, if you're impacting little bits of every part of the game at the same time, it's a lot to take in. I think that a fair number of people had contentions with some of the really basic forestry changes in that regard.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people just didn't want trees to be touched, like the tree mechanics. They didn't want timers on trees. They just wanted the old mechanics for whatever reasons that they did. And, you scale that up to bigger changes affecting more things. And it's just like, yeah, I think I want to make sure that the game is still very recognizable. And when the meta is so broken in such a short amount of time, I think that would scare me away quite a bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, but then more recently, they came out with a bit of an alternative idea. Originally thought up by NinjaPig, they came up with the idea of god alignments.
Yeah.
And these essentially were different prayers, 4 prayers each that they offered, which would be per god, that would be available presumably after a big achievement or a big quest relating to that god. And how did you feel about that initial proposal?
I mean, I thought that was a super creative and like fantastic approach to it. Again, like identifying the core problems with what you're trying to do when you do a whole new prayer book, and how the prayer system was kind of just never built for that unless you were doing an outright replacement. So trying to find that sweet spot where it's like, okay, essentially just scaling it back to, well, what if you just have a new prayer, or prayers plural, like we've already done, added to the game, like a rigor or augury type thing, but just something that's more thematically fitting to a specific area, right? Like a specific god in this instance. And again, that makes perfect sense. It's kind of weird when you think about it, that prayer as a skill that's all about that kind of godly interaction doesn't really have much interaction with godly stuff in like the grandest scheme of things. You equip some god gear to get prayer bonuses, but I don't know, there's not a whole lot of like, it's a weirdly undertapped and underutilized skill, I think, in many ways. But anyway, it's I think that approach with NinjaPig, again, it was like a really, really, really good direction. I think it's a better direction for it to take compared to before. At this point in time, it's now going to be like, right, how do you kind of balance these against one another? Because it's sort of, how do you weigh up the pros and cons? How do you go about designing still quite a lot of these things? Because there is potentially going to be a good number of them, depending on what direction they go in. And that's where you do hit in, unfortunately, a lot of conversations. Like, I think it breaks down into a few areas where it's like, the one part of the problem still, even with this, is that there's still quite a lot of information to digest and try and process, and that's just difficult for most players, mostly everyone, quite frankly, right, as we've seen for lots of different topics, whether it's prayers or whether it's like sailing new skills or combat or whatever. it is just difficult getting players to digest lots of things all at once, because it just feels a lot scarier than maybe it is, like each individual step of it. But that's still like, that just becomes exponentially harder, even just not just presenting it, but like balancing it, as I mentioned, like getting one thing versus 2 versus 4 versus 4 against another 4, so then you're dealing with 8, and then that becomes a bit nightmarish, I think. So just having to like weigh up the pros and cons of all that. And then the whole other half of the conversation, which I think these kind of god alignments ended up sort of poking much more heavily into, and really, well, at least what I perceived it felt like it was just the idea of like just the underlying complexity, and like what is prayer, what should a prayer even be doing, like how much should we be changing some interactions in the game, like what should a skill like prayer involve, how like interactive should the use of a prayer be, in terms of like the majority of them being quite passive right now, almost exclusively, only with a few like semi-active use prayers or that activate under certain effects. But those are kind of like the outliers. So it's like, what happens when you lean prayer more heavily into that direction, where it becomes more of an active and effect-based system? I don't know. That opens up such a huge can of worms. It's difficult to digest any of it, or like really process what the right decision there is. I don't know if you agree or disagree with any of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree with that. As we kind of said before, it brings up the same conversation of this universal effect that prayers have on the game. And if you're going to be introducing something that can be applied everywhere, there's so much context you have to take into account. It can affect any part of the game. And I think they initially offered 12 prayers split across 3 gods was the idea, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think, yeah. When you have all of those effects with all those bonuses and all those niche mechanics they're poking at, it's just so much to digest at once. Even for someone like me, it was really intimidating. I mean, to be fair, I'm not much of a PVMer anyway, so no matter what, I kind of feel like it's a conversation for other people more than it is mine. So I don't feel like as pulled towards going in depth on what this will do to the game.
Yeah, sure.
But it's just, scary, I suppose, seeing all those prayers at once and thinking, how many different things is this going to change that I just can't predict, I can't accommodate for at this time?
Yeah.
And I think that was probably the biggest weakness of the system as it was proposed, was just, again, too much at once. Need to scale it back a little bit. And then the implication that there's 4 prayers for each god. Well, how many prayers are we going to have to force out of potentially nothing? Like, what design space are we working from to be able to create 7 times 4 prayers or whatever?
Yeah.
Right? It's just, you have to be very creative for the last god who's going to get all the worst ideas.
Absolutely, yeah. Like, I'll give credit to, I think, sorry to interrupt you flow there. I was going to say, like, it's, I'll give credit to, like, Ninja Pig, because I know they did a couple of kind of iterations of it and worked with some other people as well, some of their friends and people in the community, getting some, like, really cool and creative concepts in some of their, like, really early drafts that they share with the community. A lot of them went down really well. But again, it's, like, I think it just highlighted the question of when it reached, like, the mass old school player base, when it was shown in, like, dev blog format, of, like, that question that I sort of mentioned, of, like, okay, how much should a prayer be actually doing? Like, how much does a player want a prayer to be changing their core gameplay in a way that they've never ever seen before? Because some of it does sound really cool and creative, especially some of their original intentions of, like, forming play styles around different gods. It's like, this god is more around, like, and almost like a range, as in not combat style, but like distance based mechanics and interesting things there. And here's another one that's more about, like, group based stuff, which is something that old school is oftentimes notoriously quite bad at, where it's very, very solo skewed. And in a way, it would be kind of nice to have some more, like, actual MMO parts of this MMORPG, even though that would probably be quite unpopular with a lot of people. And then also you've got annoying implications of, like, alts and what that means for how people actually play the game, which sucks having to consider that, but it is just a reality of things. But yeah, it's like going down that direction, it's really, really difficult. Like, again, I don't feel personally well versed enough to be able to say, like, yes, combat should have this level of new mechanics and complexity and things that are almost designed to be unknown variables that could change the game in a way that you just have to kind of wait and see how they play out, because that's very, very scary doing that. And yeah, I do think, as you say, it's like having so many iterations of each of the gods, so many prayers for each of them, and having quite a lot of gods potentially going forward in the future. That is a big old area of design space to have to think of really robust things. So I know in their final, I think, comments on at least what the most recent one was, I guess it was some months back now, even maybe, or a while back. I think they said they were planning on scaling it down, at least like removing a prayer from each one, and then maybe not even doing all those 3 initial ones, maybe just starting with the one and then adding a second god later. But even that, my feeling is like maybe they would be better off just really scaling it back. Like my gut feeling at this point is like perhaps you just do one prayer. Maybe with one, while Gothic sleeps, you just be like, here's the Gothic's prayer. Let's just concentrate on one really cool quest reward prayer. Figure out what it should do and why it should be doing it and how it's going to impact things. And then you've just got like one prayer to consider for the next time you do a god alignment. And it's like, okay, how can this other Zaros prayer compete against this Gothic's prayer? Why is this going to offer a different type of gameplay? Because obviously when you just crunch it all down to just one thing to compare, way easier for a player to understand that, right? When you're pitching a single prayer to someone. Because all the conversation can focus on just the effect of that one thing. And then B, again, just like balancing all future god alignments off of just one thing that can change about your prayer book. I assume that would have to be a heck of a lot simpler from a balancing standpoint and like a game design standpoint.
Yeah.
So that's where my kind of feelings at now. I've no idea exactly how it's going to re-emerge when they're going to bring those conversations back. I imagine it will start happening quite soon. But yeah, I feel like that would be like the much, much safer bet if whenever they do bring those conversations back, if they end up being a bit frosty and mixed again, then yeah, maybe that would be the right direction for it. Just simplifying and reducing as much as possible.
Yeah. And that's pretty much what I said on Twitter at the time is like, hey, what if we could just have one signature prayer per god?
Yeah.
And that not only does it simplify the balancing process and simplify the conversations and, the day one patch that'll inevitably come, but it also allows us to, in a way, I think it gives you some ability to focus more power on that single offering. If offering 3 new prayers or 4 new prayers as part of a quest, that introduces you either, if you're looking to introduce a certain level of reward to this quest, you're kind of stuck making 4 weaker options or 1 stronger option, because those 4 weaker options, they can be more broadly applied. They can go in all these different directions. Whereas 1, you know exactly what it does, and it's good at this one niche thing that you're letting it operate in. I think that would just be a much better approach, because I would really like to have another time where we can say, it kind of like the Rigger prayer, where it's like, that's a big upgrade. That is impressive to get the Zamorak prayer.
Yeah.
Versus what I'd be afraid of having 3 or 4 different options, where you'd be, it'd be like 4 kind of mediocre, mild options that are, they're depowered so that they can all have little niches that they work in and not increase the power of this one quest by too much at once.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you even bringing up like Rigger there, you kind of highlight they've already kind of encountered this problem, if you could call it that, with like raids, like Chambers launching with 3 prayers technically, and it's like, okay, we want a new Bisp ranged one and magic one, and I guess like here's preserve, like have some extra potion time, which like initially was tied to, like that was all 1 prayer scroll, which I can kind of see Rigger and Augury being one, but like with preserve in the mix as well, it's like, oh my god, that is like of a whole different power level there of just overwhelmingly uninteresting and kind of useless 99% of the time. So it's like that already highlights like we've run into that problem a bit in the past, just with the first set of like new prayers that Old School had. So yeah, you're bound to have that again when you're trying to go for even more kind of mechanically intricate and complex and attempts at interesting prayers, but also ones that are impactful but not too impactful. But then it's a messy spot. So yeah, again, just like going for single prayers is probably the best bet. Or I mean, alternatively they could, because they did already start this with, I think, the last god alignment iteration they showed, like of essentially like altering existing prayers, which is an interesting concept in a way as well. Like that's not a terrible design space to tap into. Like I think there was I think it was redemption variants where they sort of highlighted, hey, these are 2 different gods that altered redemption in different ways. It's like, I know some people really hated the idea of that. It's like, oh, this is wasted prayers. You're just doing the same prayer again, but slightly different. I don't know. I kind of thought that was an interesting direction to go with it, but maybe players would want, I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe some players would actually want like a more boring thing where it's like, yeah, Gothix just offers like a boosted redemption, and Zamorak offers a boosted retribution, and Sarah offers a boosted blooming, what, I don't know, rapid restore, something up, like something boring like that. But I mean, it would be like the safer
I
way of doing it, but I don't think that would be as, I don't know, in keeping with the spirit of it, and not as interesting anyway.
it's a good point you bring up, and I think the pushback against the redemption variants was that for a lot of players it felt like they didn't have enough ideas, so they just popped in some extra redemption
Yeah,
variants, and like they didn't have much more going for them. And yeah, I think that was the same feeling that I came away with. It was like, man, we're trying to push for 12 prayers, and we can't really, it doesn't feel like we're filling all those slots very well. So yeah, that's definitely the way that I had perceived it. As for like, yeah, I think it comes back to your question: should we be introducing crazy new mechanics, or should it follow roughly the pattern of other prayers? What if we just did have? I think in the Ruinous Powers there was a prayer that increased your accuracy in all attack styles by 40%,
yeah,
presumably mutually exclusive with other, attack or accuracy boosting prayers, maybe even exclusive to other damage boosting prayers as well. And it's like, you know what? Maybe that's just something that's new that people can play with and people feel good about, and we don't have to stress too much because we almost already know how that's going to be used. We already know it's not going to be useful in certain places and will be useful in others. So I think there is, as boring as it is, there is something to be said for that approach.
yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we'll move on to the last topic that I had in mind. And I don't have much time left, to be honest, maybe another 15 minutes.
Yeah, sounds
So
good.
we'll have to touch on this very lightly. Um, Project Rebalance.
Oh
It's
boy,
unfortunately
just
we kind of left
just a slightly big
the
one
big
to end
topic
on.
for last.
Oh dear.
Well, I don't think you'd be too interested in many parts of it. I don't care what happens to the Void Waker. You can delete it or you can double its power. It really doesn't matter to me too much. But there are some parts, especially more towards the early and mid game, that I probably have a lot more opinions about. And so I think the skilling one, there was a fair number of changes. There are some changes to agility courses, to thieving. What feelings did you have around that?
Yeah, I think I'll try and like speeder my opinions on this a bit more. I think broadly
Yeah.
speaking, like I like the intent behind basically everything, like just conceptually the idea of Project Rebalance stuff. I like the idea of going through and saying, hey, this stuff is either dead content or it doesn't really make sense, or with like some slight tweaks here and there, we can bring some things back into relevancy, make a nicer progression curve, blah blah blah, like otherwise improve core parts of the game. I like that. I can get on board with that concept. I think some of the specific proposals, I mean, again, could go through and like nitpick all individual bits of it and say like, I'm not sure I like that one thing, but I quite like this, but kind of beside the point. I think the bigger things for me is like I do like the broad directions they wanted to go in. I just kind of wish they had have broken it down into individual categories a bit more and spent more time on specific things rather than trying to do a bit of a scattershot, really big, broad kind of blast at lots of different topics, but at sort of a surface level, like doing agility and a bit of thieving and a bit of mining and a bit of slayer. And then obviously before we can get into combat stuff, it's like, is that the best way of doing it? Like, do we need to do that? Because I actually take a bit of point with one of the most recent devblog updates they did, where they sort of talk about why they wanted to do this big, quite explosive set of rebalances all at once, all as one big project. And going through saying like we want to limit the amount of times we're rebalancing and moving stuff and changing stats and things. And I get that from like especially gear. Like you don't want to be logging into the game every other week and like your sword has gained an extra 10 strength bonus, but this over here has lost 15. It's like, what? Like we don't want old school to go down that path, absolutely. But I don't think we're really in any worry of that happening either. And especially for skilling changes and stuff like that and small little rebalances here and there. Like we've done those kinds of things just in small doses for years and years and years now. I'd argue that's kind of what the core of qual updates are, and small kind of skilling expansions and content additions and all sorts. So I don't know if I fully agree with their sentiment of like, this is the way to do it. This is the only way it makes sense to offer a big, like explosive set of lots of changes covering lots of things all at once. I would have much rather them sit down and be like, right, okay, we'll have to do some agility improvements. It's So like, here's our thoughts on current courses. Here's like the XP rates. We might have to tweak these old courses, bring them to relevancy, smooth out the curve for the rooftops. Here's how all of them will interplay with each other, especially focusing on the really dead ones that I think have seemingly gone pretty much unnoticed now. Like the old Dorgish Khan course, I don't think I even got a look in the whole rebalance stuff. It's like, why is that not being rebalanced? Like, that is absolutely prime real estate for revamping dead content. So I do worry looking at stuff like that. We've gone on a very, what I would describe as a bit too much of a surface level look at some of these things, and we're not going deep enough. The fact that it required quite a bit of pushback from the players to be like, can you at least bring forward some of the run energy discussions and how agility is impacted by graceful and stamina and pools of rejuvenation and all sorts? That whole conversation, they're like, yeah, well, okay, we'll do that a bit earlier in the year than we were intending now. And so sort of had to like buckle to the player pressure there, whereas I just think it would have been better for them to be like, right, let's look at agility, let's look at all courses, let's look at the core reward output, let's look at run energy, let's just look at agility as a whole. Let's take our time, go through it. There's not really any rush. Like, the game's been around for 20 years. Agility's been around for most of that time. It's not going anywhere. So it doesn't have to change right this minute. So yeah, let's just have a nice conversation about this stuff and concepts and things. And then once we feel content with agility, maybe we pull up a different topic. Let's talk about mining. Let's talk about the different mining activities and minigames, and then talk about core rocks themselves and how kind of invalidated they've been over the years. So yeah, that's my big takeaway on the broadest sense, is that I do wish they had have just broken it down into their individual categories so we could spend more time on each individual bit. Because my worry is that we're probably going to get these surface level changes now, and I'm very pessimistic, I know, but I think things are going to get left as they are, and then we're going to move on to other things and other topics and other parts of the game to rebalance in the future, and then things that could have done with being rebalanced the first time around are just not then going to be touched at all, and that makes me a little bit sad.
No, it's interesting you say that, and it's not something I've thought super deeply about before, to be honest. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think you'd get a much more focused conversation if you did one bite at a time. At the same time, I do get kind of their logic. As you said, if you're changing things little bit by little bit every week, that can be it can be confusing for the player, I suppose, and that everything is changing all these little pieces at a time. It's kind of hard to gather the scope of this project that they want to do, which, I mean, the fundamental idea is let's try and reset things to more stable, manageable position, versus the approach that they've gone with, which is pretty much like, here, let's lay out everything on the table. This is what we're going to do to all these skills within a relatively short period of time. And after this, we just don't have to touch it again. And everything can go back to a normal, stable position for another, ideally forever, but hopefully long time. But I guess, as you said, that is simultaneously the weakness in that if you resolve that it's balanced now, and why do we need to touch it further? Well, it might not have worked well the first time.
Yeah.
As to go into some more specifics, like I thought the skilling changes are fine. Again, I don't have a ton of opinions on the combat changes, or like the higher end combat changes. The stuff, maybe I'd like your opinion on some of this, but I was okay with the changes to magic weakness. I think some of the proposals they made, and to be fair, I haven't looked at their latest proposal for the magic weakness changes, but some of them felt really weird. It was not only like a really short list, but it felt like they were trying to make Pokemon type weaknesses. Whereas like flying, no, what is it? Ice beats flying. And it's like, why is that? And it's like, well, Pokemon, because those are, I don't know, the elements of the Pokemon themselves, or something like that. But like, if you look at the fantasy of RuneScape, it's like, I don't know. Why is it that, in Pokemon, water is good against Earth? And it's like, fair enough, it's Pokemon. But what was it? Water is good against the giant mole? It was like, I like the really obvious ones. Like, fire giants are weak to water. Great, 100%, send it. But even I think there was, just some of those ones were just really weird.
Yeah, for me, I'm fully in agreement there. It's like, again, the big ones that make perfect sense, I'm fully on board with. And that's where, like, my only kind of annoyance, I guess, is that I would have liked to have seen a more robustly consistent system where, like, I've spoken to a few people, maybe in yourself over this, like the idea of expanding, like, the monster attribute system a bit more deeply, because that already exists in game in a number of, like, we identify attributes to monsters to be able to use certain things against them, right? Like, all draconic creatures are referred to as draconic for the purposes of, like, your dragon equipment, like dragon hunter lance and whatnot, are good against draconic creatures, and, you know, undead creatures, demonic creatures. We even have, like, you know, things like fiery creatures are already established in game, but it's just not really used for anything other than that weird low level, maybe like pearl tipped bolts or something have the weird water effect, or sapphire bolt, I don't know what it is. One of them has an effect anyway. So that's what I personally was kind of hoping for. It's like, right, if you can establish really clear and concise and super logical and intuitive, like, groupings of creatures, like all creatures that are very visibly made of fire or exist in flames in some way, shape or form, have a fiery entity aspect of them, they are fiery creatures. Like, they are already established. And yeah, they will always be weak to water spells. Cool, I'm fully on board with that. It's nice and simple. I think the dragon stuff gets a bit weirder as well when you start, like, because I've started breaking down dragons into multiple types of, like, so metal dragons are only weak to earth spells, and then chromatic dragons are only weak to water spells. Whereas, like, at the minute, dragons technically fall under the pre-existing, I think, fiery type that already exists in game. So it's like you're already making a weird slight breakaway. I can partially follow the logic of saying, well, an earth spell is more like a earthy, impactful thing that can break a hard metallic scale. I don't know. Question.
Yeah, you're reaching
exactly.
too hard,
It's starting
right?
to get a bit tenuous. Whereas, like, I could still just agree with, like, fire-breathing creatures are weak to water because water extinguishes their flames. So I would have probably been more accepting of just saying dragons blanket weakness to water. Just keep it simple. And then again, it gets more annoying to be still where they've started folding in additional monsters. Like, they included, like you said, some, like, aerial creatures and things, and maybe, like, Aviancy weak to air, which I kind of get. Like, they're in the air, you can sort of disrupt them with air spells. It's like, okay, yeah, I can buy that. But there's a lot of other aerial and flying creatures, like lowly little bats that are always flying around. They should surely fall into the same system, right? But then this system could be like, well, no, unless they've explicitly, you know, added them to their list, they're not. Which is where, again, I would have preferred it to have been like, hey, here's, like, an aerial monster attribute, so you just know consistently, is this creature flying? Cool, it's going to be weak to air spells. Just, like, give us some consistency there. And yeah, going one step further, where I think they have stepped over the mark of saying, oh, and by the way, air spells are also good against more ethereal things like ghosts and even skeletons. It's like, no, we have Crumble Undead. The Crumble Undead spell exists. That's what its identity is. It's a magic spell that's good against undead.
Yeah.
Don't make that air weakness. That doesn't make sense. And then they did demons, saying all demons, I think, are weak to water now. It's like, no, we have a whole spell book of demon bane spells that suck. Make them better. Don't give them an elemental weakness as well. It's like, oh man, we're going from one extreme to another, where it's like powered staves, and now we're trying to crunch it all back to just forcing the 4 basic elements in a way that feels too reductive. And it's like, no, going too far now. We're picking 2 specific things. It's not being consistently applied enough, and the ones that are being chosen are just already causing issues in my mind anyway. And yeah, there are, like, bigger implications there of, like, what the magic elements would have done. There are conversations that some of us have had about, like, it would have been nice if the elements just felt like they were doing something a bit different, because once you normalize all the damage outputs of them, which is what they're planning on doing, they are going to feel a little bit like, you know, what color blob do you want to cast at the enemy, like green or blue or red, but they're all sort of feeling the same now, with same damage output, same little animation, just same, right? And they're just not doing anything unique. So I would have loved a more kind of unique elemental effect direction, right? Like the big obvious one has always been like, a fire spell should probably inflict a little short damage over time burn effect. I mean, we already have burn in game now. I think was it with Varlamore? I think they added a little burn hit splat with that equipment from Perilous Moons or whatever it is. And so yeah, like things like that exist now. And I think I would have liked to have seen that, like a unique identity being carved out for the actual elements themselves. Like a water spell feels a tiny bit different, even if it's just a tiny little modifier. It doesn't have to be as crazy influential as like an ice spell freezing things in place, or a blood spell healing you constantly. Maybe it could have been something slightly smaller, but yeah, I would have liked to have seen the more unique side of Magic embraced a bit. And I don't know how that's going to feel in practice. And also the other elephant in the room of like, is it even going to be strong enough to matter? Like the DPS calcs versus the current powered staves are still going to kind of dominate. unless you're using the harmonized staff. And then there's a whole blooming can of worms about locking basically the all functionality of reasonable elemental spell DPS behind the harmonized staff, locked behind like the nightmare, and then oh god, drop rates. There's a whole other can of worms. It's I don't know. It's again, there are like nice intentions behind all of this, but I am a little bit concerned about like the direct implementation of it that's been proposed.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like the defenses aren't well thought through enough. Like, I kind of like the fact, I like and dislike the fact that spells have a character to them in a way. It's iconic when you hit 13 magic and can cast Fire Strike and hit 8s, and you know that little red splash, that thing can damage big, right? Versus you've come so far from your level 1 airstrike. Whereas now it's just like, oh, well, no, you just keep airstriking, same thing.
Yeah, that is going to feel weird, just like
no different.
Stick on an air staff, camp the first spell, auto cast, and then that's kind of going to be
Never
the magic
move from
meta,
it.
like because you won't really see the strong elemental weaknesses until you're much deeper into the game, based on the monsters they've picked currently, anyway. So it's like,
yeah,
that's going to be weird. Just like the first magic spell you get is going to be the only one you use for quite some time. And then until you're probably just going to migrate to the first trident or like scepter thing you get. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I've probably done this to death elsewhere, but the ranged weaknesses as well. It's like, oh man, don't know. I feel like you're introducing a very big system to a very small list of NPCs. I feel like it might be very overdone. Especially the categorization of light, standard, and heavy.
Oh man, yeah.
Not only is that wrong, I don't know, I don't know why bolts are considered heavy.
Yeah.
But it's just that's not how. Well, that doesn't remotely represent really how ranged weapons work in real life.
No.
I don't need an exact representation of that by any means, but like if anything, you could try to go like a range slash stab crush. I don't know what a range slash looks like, but and that would make a little more sense. Or the fact that bolts and javelins are considered heavy. So whenever you want to buff one or the other, like ballistas are never going to be DPS.
Yeah, that's it.
Right?
I think that's the ultimate, like, well, one of the many issues. I'll reiterate some of your points as well. It's like the fact that they're basically broken those categories down to those three with the explicit direction of like, oh yeah, we want bolts to be separate from bows and arrows, to be separate from darts and blowpipes. So okay, cool, but that's kind of how the game already is balanced. Like you've already taken a crossbow to some places and a twisted bow to another and a blowpipe to another. So it's like, what
the weapons are all different.
Yeah, like what new avenue is this opening up? Because whatever else, as you just said, no one's ever bringing a javelin and a ballista unless you're reworking javelins and ballistas, which you could do independently of changing defenses. So that's not changing anything. And yeah, I'm a little bit skeptical as to like the true effectiveness of what that's actually going to have. And yeah, as you say, like the thematic side of it for me is like, again, we're both like sticklers for themes and world building and everything, and I'm massively on board with you there. And it's like, as you described, like as much as it doesn't necessarily get utilized as such, like I'll admit, like the melee system of stab/crush at least makes sense in principle, because it like a stabbing blow is different than like a crushing blow, right? Like you could logically, I could, again, just much like we're talking about elemental weaknesses, like yeah, a water spell logically should extinguish a fiery enemy. I can logically understand, like I've got a crushing weapon, this is probably going to be good against this weird little heavily, I don't know, rocky armored little critter thing. I can probably like crush it to like little pebbles and pieces, whereas if I tried to slash it with my sword, it would just dink off and it'd just be ineffective. So I could kind of intuitively understand how that could be used. As I said, the system doesn't necessarily get used like that. I think a lot of the time we get very arbitrary weaknesses applied to monsters, but it is what it is. But yeah, range technically could fall into that, like, but it just wouldn't be the categories that they picked, right? Like that's the difference, where the melee system was built around the themes and then the content was balanced around that, whereas the minute they're going backwards for range, where they're choosing the balancing they want and then trying to mold the themes around them, but the themes aren't really working. Like if you were to truly do, like you said, the stab/crush variant of ranged, I'd say it'd be like, I've heard things like piercing blows, like some sort of stabbing piercing strike of an arrow, but that would also be applicable to like a bolt pretty effectively pierces a target. much like a dart at
Mm-hmm.
close range would pretty effectively pierce a target, maybe a slightly weaker arm target, but it would still be like a piercing, stabbing strike. Whereas some of the things that would do a different type of attack, something that might be more like a slash or like a hacking kind of tearing blow, would be things like a thrown axe, right? Where it's got like a big nasty blade to it and it sort of like tears into the flesh. This is getting a bit morbid now, but yeah, it's sort of that's sort of I'd imagine that being like quite a different damaging effect that might be good against a different type of target. And then same with like, that would mean things like, obby rings being thrown, or like the Ralos throwing star, whatever its actual name is, right? Added with the Colosseum, with like big jagged blade edges that sort of rotate and things that sort of like hack away and tear. That I could totally see that being thematically a different category. And that would leave your last one and being more like, I don't know, the only thing that makes sense in my mind is more of like an impactful blasting blow type thing, or bombardment type thing. Exactly, like cannons and like chimchompers, which is not a pierce, it's not a slash, it's just boom, right? It's like a blast, an impact, a whoa. And maybe salamanders, you could justify being that one, and yeah, or any sort of dwarven contraptions if they ever came up with different things like that in the future. Like that would be its own thing. But that's how I think you could definitely do a thematic distinction that falls more closely in alignment with melee stuff. But again, that wasn't the gameplay they wanted to instill, right? Like they wanted to just focus on bolts, arrows, darts, which is kind of the current meta, so it makes sense. But in doing so, yeah, like light, standard, heavy, it's just sort of, that's a really weird and super, super artificial way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and as I said before, it feels like a lot of work with very little gain. Like, that maybe the skeptic in me is pretty much screaming out, just like, so the high-level PVM community is having a hard time, so they're changing the rest of the game to work with them. And it's like, yeah, that's kind of feels like how it is. They need more design space at the top, so they want everything else below it to change to accommodate for it. It's like, this is really convoluted, not well thought through system, which is only existing to appeal to a very small portion of the community. I think I'm just going to have to say, find some different mechanics to appease them. I think they deserve appeasing too. I just don't think this is the right way to do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's, because again, it feels a bit odd to me when it's sort of, worst case scenario, I think it could end up feeling like a bit of half a system. If you were aware that monsters have these 3 distinct range weaknesses, but then you're kind of like looking for your own, okay, where are my 3 distinct range weaknesses? It's like, oh no, you don't have them. Oh, why? Where's my 3 distinct range offenses?
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, they're not displayed. It's just like, you just got to know that when you've got arrows and a bow equipped, you've just got a different range system. Whereas melee tells you when you've got a different melee style equipped very, very clearly with a nice numerical value. But nah, range ain't going to do that. And so it's going to feel like, to me, again, it might feel like half a system where you can see half of it but not the other half. And does that feel just weird and unfinished almost?
Well, you're not going to monster examine every monster
exactly,
you attempt?
That
Figure
super
it out.
convenient spell.
Right. Yeah, it's not that this isn't a problem elsewhere, but it's another one of those things that you just have to wiki it, don't you?
Yeah.
You just have to search it up and ask other people. There's practically no way that it can be properly relayed to you through the game itself.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. Anyways, I really do have to go.
Yeah,
so on that
sounds
really
good.
somber note,
Super cheery end, isn't it? Oh, no.
Yeah, no, we should have reorganized this.
Oh, no,
that's okay. But yeah, really enjoyed the chat.
Yeah,
and,
good talk as always.
Yeah, hope all of you who are listening to this point have enjoyed it as well. Anyway, have a good one, everybody.
See ya.